Chapter 1974. Zicala was dumbfounded. How can it be a processed goose? They only have one chef, but they have as many customers as a big restaurant. If the ingredients are not processed in advance, it will be too late, Jinfuni explained. But, how do I know if it's gaga? Zicala was a little anxious. Jinfuni thought for a while and said, then we can only try it. Ha! Zicala opened her eyes wide. No. I mean, look at the goose in the boss's hand. It doesn't look like gaga, Jinfuni quickly explained. It doesn't look like it. Gaga is not that big. Zicala stared at it for a while and nodded. Then she pursed her lips and said, but where would gaga go? Why can't we find it anywhere? Jinfuni patted the back of her hand and comforted her. Don't worry. After dinner, I'll ask those girls to help you look for it. They have a lot of connections. Maybe they can find it. Okay. Zicala nodded and calmed down a little. Soon, the dishes they ordered were served one after another. The bright red braised pork was fragrant, and the stir-fried squid was delicious. But what attracted their attention the most was the white and tender tofu pudding. Women had no resistance to anything that could make them beautiful. Of course, before coming to Amy's, they still had some doubts about the rumor that tofu pudding could beautify them. After all, those who claimed that eating could make them beautify quickly were mostly liars. But no matter whether it had beautifying effects or not, the tofu pudding in front of them looked very tempting. The fresh bean fragrance hit their noses. The sweet one looks great. Jinfuni turned the bowl around and looked at the syrup evenly spread over the tofu pudding. The consistency and color were just right. The salty one looks better. It won't be greasy. Zicala pushed her own salty tofu pudding. And you can't eat too much sugar. Just eat a little every now and then. It's okay. Jinfuni couldn't wait to scoop up the tofu pudding. The tofu pudding was like egg custard, but it was more springy than egg custard. Jinfuni dug into the tofu pudding that was covered by the golden red syrup. The cut was as white as jade, but it was quickly covered by the sticky syrup. The tofu pudding that was wrapped in the crystal clear syrup swayed slightly in the spoon, looking like an exquisite piece of art. The fragrant and tender tofu pudding almost melted in his mouth, and the syrup that was wrapped around it was extremely rich. The sweetness of the syrup blended perfectly with the tofu pudding, and a faint tofu pudding lingered in his mouth. It was sweet but not greasy. Jinfuni opened her eyes, and couldn't help but praise the tofu pudding in front of her. This flavor is definitely the best dessert ever. As a person who had been dealing with breakfast pastries for decades, he still couldn't imagine how the boss had turned soybeans into such a delicate and delicious delicacy. Hearing that, Zicala couldn't help but scoop up a spoonful of tofu pudding. The white tofu pudding was wrapped in the orange-red syrup, and there was a little bit of chopped pickled mustard on top. The tofu pudding looked very springy, and when it was put into his mouth, it melted without chewing. The sweet tofu pudding, the savory pickled mustard, and the syrup blended together perfectly, and her eyes lit up immediately. It's really delicious. Zicala felt that she was suddenly wrapped in warmth, and her mood after losing Gaga was also eased. For the time being, she just wanted to immerse herself in the enjoyment of the delicious food and feel this blissful and wonderful feeling. Soon, the mother and daughter both ate a serving of tofu pudding. Although I don't feel any changes, I really want another bowl, Zicala said after putting down the spoon, still longing for more. Then let's have another serving. Jinfuni nodded in agreement, and asked Mia, who happened to pass by, for another serving. I'm sorry, dear customer. The tofu pudding is limited every day, and each person can only order one serving, Mia said with a smile. I see. Okay, thank you. Jinfuni nodded. As a caterer, she naturally wouldn't make things difficult for the waiters. What a pity. Then we can only come back next time. Sikala was a little disappointed. Come on, we've had the appetizers. Now let's try the other dishes. Shinfuni picked up the chopsticks and put a piece of red braised pork into her mouth. This red braised pork is also delicious. Try it. Shinfuni ate the fat but not greasy red braised pork, and also put a piece into Sikala's bowl. This meat is so fat. Sikala looked at the red braised pork with a little resistance, but when she saw Shinfuni's stunned expression, she hesitated for a while, and then picked up the red braised pork, and took a small bite of the lean part of the meat. With a gentle bite, the sweet and fragrant gravy flowed out of the meat. Even the lean meat was crisp and chewy, and it melted in her mouth with a gentle chew. This meat. How can it be so delicious? Sikala opened her mouth slightly, and revealed an expression of disbelief. Even the lean meat that was usually dry became so delicious. You will lose your soul if you eat like this. You have to eat the whole piece of meat with the skin to experience the real ultimate delicacy. Shinfuni had already picked up the second piece of meat, and didn't forget to remind her. I can't eat too much fat meat. Sikala said, but she still put the whole piece of red braised pork into her mouth. The soft wild boar meat almost melted in her mouth. The lean meat was crisp and chewy, dry but not greasy, and the skin was smooth and tender, and the bite was barely discernible. With a gentle bite, the fragrant and sweet gravy flowed out of the meat. It was fat but not greasy, and the delicacy of the red braised pork was perfectly released at this moment. As a child who grew up in restaurants, Sikala completely inherited Shinfuni's taste. She was very picky about food. But at this moment, she couldn't find any fault with this piece of red braised pork. Even she, who hated fat meat, was addicted to the ultimate experience brought by the fat meat and the skin, and couldn't extricate herself. This boss is so awesome. Sikala raised her head and looked at Meg in the kitchen, and couldn't help but exclaim. Yeah. If I could find such a son-in-law, I wouldn't have given birth to a daughter in vain. Shinfuni nodded her head. Mother. Sikala said with a blush on her face. Ha. I just said it casually. This young man is pretty good. Shinfuni looked at Meg with a motherly smile, as if she had already decided on a son-in-law. I don't want to talk to you. Sikala lowered her head and ate 2 mouthfuls of rice, and then picked up a piece of red braised pork and put it into her mouth. Here's your roast goose. Please enjoy. At this time, a voice suddenly sounded in their ears. Then, a large plate of paper floated out of the kitchen and landed gently between them. A roast goose that had been cut open and pieced back together was lying on the plate quietly, with 2 dipping sauces beside it. Chapter 1975. The rich aroma of the roast goose wafted over, suppressing the aroma of the other dishes on the table. The surrounding customers all looked over. This was the first table of customers who had roast goose, and they all wanted to see their comments and reactions. Quack. Sikala, who was eating happily, looked at the roast goose in front of her, and tears started to well up in her eyes again. The color, the aroma, the plate presentation, and the knife skills. This boss is really young and promising. Shinfuni continued to praise. She picked up a piece of roast goose breast with her chopsticks, dipped it in the dipping sauce, and put it into her mouth. Oh my God! Oh my God! This roast goose is amazing. Eat it! Eat it! Shinfuni's eyes lit up, and she exclaimed. As she spoke, she picked up a small goose leg and put it in the dipping sauce in front of Shinfuni. Quack, it's so miserable. Why is a goose so pitiful? Cicala couldn't help but take a bite of the roast goose leg with tears in her eyes. The goose skin was crispy and fragrant, and the meat under the skin was especially tender and plump. The rich aroma of the braised goose seemed to have permeated every part of the meat. As she bit down, the gravy burst in her mouth, and her taste buds were shocked. The dipping sauce was sweet and sour, and stimulated her taste buds. She only chewed a little, and the skin and meat separated. The more she chewed, the more fragrant it became. There was also a faint aroma of roasted fruits. Cicala was shocked on the spot. This taste completely overturned all her imagination of roast goose. It's so fragrant. Cicala couldn't help but think of Quack as she ate. Then, she couldn't help but think of Quack. Tears came from her heart, and she couldn't help but cry. Look, she's crying so sweetly. Amy looked at Cicala and whispered. Isn't her goose gone? Why does she still want to eat it? Jessica was puzzled. Amy put her head on Ugly Duckling's head, and said without hesitation, it means she's sad because her fattened goose flew away, and she didn't even have a bite. I see. Jessica and nodded thoughtfully. Cicala felt sorry for Quack in her heart, but her body was too honest. In the blink of an eye, she swallowed a roast goose leg, and even the bones were all eaten. Look, didn't I tell you that it would definitely be delicious? That lady was so delicious that she cried. She truly understood what it meant to be extremely delicious. An uncle next door looked at his wife sitting opposite him and said carefully, Madam, why don't we try one too? If we don't eat it, we'll definitely regret it. Are you staring at the little girl? The madam's eyes were filled with killing intent. No, I'm just looking at the roast goose. The man's body trembled and he quickly shook his head. His status in the family was obvious. All right, then I'll order one. The lady took a deep look at the man and nodded slightly. Madam is wise. The man was overjoyed and quickly called the waiter to order a roast goose for himself. The crying Cicala indeed brought a very good advertising effect to the roast goose. The customers, who were used to letting others test the thunder first, began to place orders for the new roast goose. Looking at the roast geese floating out of the kitchen, Cicala chewed the roast geese with tears in his eyes and faced life with a smile. Burp! Cicala and Jinfuni let out a long burp at the same time. The two of them looked at each other, and then at the empty plates in front of them. They were stunned for a moment, and then they revealed a polite and awkward smile. Are you full? Let's go and look for Gaga, Jinfuni said. All right. Cicala nodded. She felt a little guilty at the mention of Gaga, and then she couldn't help but think of that delicious roast goose. Let's go. Jinfuni stood up to pay the bill. Before she left, she didn't forget to take a look at the kitchen and praised softly, this young man is really good. Let's go. Cicala held Jinfuni's arm and left quickly. Jinfuni looked as if she was a mother-in-law looking at her son-in-law. After they walked out of the restaurant, Jinfuni couldn't help but look back and say with a smile, the food was really good. We can come here often in the future. I didn't expect there to be such a delicious restaurant in Chaos City. Okay. Cicala agreed unenthusiastically. She calmed down a lot after they walked out of the restaurant, but she was still worried about Gaga. Let's go. I'll bring you to meet those aunties of yours. They might have a way to help you find Gaga. Jinfuni held Cicala's hand and prepared to leave. Puff, puff. Just then, two sounds of flapping wings sounded. A big white goose wearing a silver collar flapped its wings and landed in front of them. The two of them stopped in their tracks and were stunned. Gaga. Cicala looked at the collar on the big white goose's neck, and said with surprise and joy. Don't run, fat goose. I'm going to kill you and cook you today. A middle-aged woman with short hair rushed towards them with a knife in her hand. She looked fierce and ferocious. That big white goose looked back and was about to take off again in a panic. "Don't be afraid. I'm here." Cicala quickly squatted down and hugged it. She glared at that middle-aged woman. The passers-by said a fat woman with short hair took away their gaga. It must be her. That woman rushed to Cicala, who was hugging the goose, and said fiercely, You let go of me. This is my goose." "Nonsense. This is my goose," Cicala said angrily. She reached out to touch the goose's head and comforted it. "Gaga, don't be afraid. I'm here." "You're talking nonsense. My goose just ran out and you said it was yours. Let everyone be the judge. How can you do that? If you don't let go of me, I'll beat you," that fat woman said and was about to pull Cicala away. At this moment, many people had gathered around them to watch the fun. "Sister, don't you think it's too much to talk to a child like this?" Enchanting stepped forward and stood in front of Cicala. "Who are you?" The fat woman stopped and looked at Enchanting, who was dressed luxuriously. She suddenly became less aggressive. "I'm his mother," Enchanting said. "You can't do that even if you are his mother. This goose is mine. You can't take it for yourselves." The fat woman became arrogant again. "Oh, you really dare to say that?" Enchanting sneered. "This goose was hatched from an egg and raised by my daughter. She treats it like a treasure. This morning, I let it out for a walk in front of the shop, and you took it with you. We searched for it all morning, but we couldn't find it. Then we ran into it on the road. You said it was your goose, but I think you are the thief who stole it." Hearing this, the fat woman changed her expression and said unnaturally, You're slandering me. How can you prove that this goose is yours?" Gaga's collar was custom-made when it was 1 year old. "It's in the Stallone's silverware shop in front of us. Do you want me to take you to the boss to verify it?" Cicala stood up with Gaga in her arms and said to the fat woman, "You're crazy. I don't want this goose. I'll give it to you as a gift." The fat woman cursed and turned to leave quickly. "Humph." Cicala snorted at her back and hugged Gaga tightly in her arms. Chapter 1976. Maybe Gaga hadn't realized the change in her position in her master's heart. She snuggled in Cicala's arms and called out to the fat woman proudly. Enchanting went up and touched Gaga. She wanted to say something to comfort her, but she changed her mind. Gaga is really fat. Cicala and Enchanting looked at each other and smiled. There was something strange in their smiles. Gaga, Gaga, Gaga. Gaga rubbed her head against Cicala's hand and called out. "Okay, I know you're hungry. I'll take you home to eat now." Cicala carried Gaga home and scolded her in a low voice. "Also, don't run around in the future. Don't wander around alone. If you meet bad guys, you should know to run home. You're a good girl, but we can't be together." "Why? I don't deserve you." Slap. The girl cried like a weeping beauty. She retracted her trembling hand. "That's not what you said when you chased me yesterday. You know, people change, and I'm a fickle person." The young man with long red hair looked up at the sky at a 45-degree angle and sighed. "Actually, I knew from the beginning that we couldn't make it to the end. You bastard, I don't want to hold you up. You deserve better." The young man looked at the girl and said calmly, "Go home early. I won't see you off." "Boo-hoo," the girl cried and turned to leave. Sigh. Sentimental people always have a lot of troubles. The young man looked at the girl's back and sighed softly. Aren't you the scumbag that the girls always talk about? A white-haired old man who was leaning against a pillar with a slender bamboo stick in his hand said with a smile. I'm not a scumbag. I just want to give each of my sisters a home. The young man looked melancholy. That's enough. I came to Chaos City on official business. You've only been here for a few days, and you've already ruined so many girls. The old man rolled his eyes. However, upon closer inspection, his eyes were actually completely white. Grandpa, you're going too far. I'm just having a heart-to-heart talk with these beautiful girls. I didn't even touch their hands. How can you say that I'm defiling them? I have professional ethics. Noah said seriously, since I can't stay for them, I can't leave too many traces in their hearts and bodies. That's immoral. You're quite the scumbag, aren't you? Morant laughed. Suddenly, he started coughing violently. It took him a while to calm down. Hee hee. Noah patted Melander's back, seemingly unfazed by his coughing. He smiled and asked, But Grandpa, we've been here for 3 days, and we haven't seen the thing you're talking about. Could it be that you've miscalculated and that thing hasn't been born yet? Melander shook his head slightly and said that half of it in the Thunderstorm Mountains is pretty good, but the other half has escaped. We've been to many places in the past 2 years, but we're always late. The tortoiseshell stone predicted that that thing might appear in Chaos City, so it's not wrong to come here and take a look. Alright, then let's walk around and take a look. Noah nodded. He picked up the bag on the ground and carried it on his back. He followed Melander unhurriedly. Melander was holding a thin bamboo pole in his hand, but he didn't touch the ground like a normal blind person. He walked like a normal person, and even knew how to avoid obstacles and people. He didn't look like a blind person. However, if you looked closely at him, you'd notice that his ears were moving slightly. Noah followed beside Melander, but he was still a little restless. He looked around, and when he saw young and beautiful girls, he would stop for a while. However, he only looked at them, and didn't do anything out of line. The grandfather and grandson turned into the Aiden Square. Melander suddenly stopped, and his expression became a little serious. Grandpa, what's wrong? Noah suddenly became a little nervous. There's a ghostly aura. A hint of red light suddenly lit up in Melander's white eyes. He flipped his hand, and a tortoiseshell stone appeared in his palm. Streaks of red light appeared on the tortoiseshell. In the end, only 2 streaks of red light were left, and they intersected to form a red dot. It's in that direction. Melander's gaze moved away from the tortoiseshell stone, and he looked at the other end of the Aiden Square. Those white eyes seemed to be able to transcend space. Is it really a devil? Noah's expression was a little nervous, but also a little excited. It could be, or it could just be someone who's come into contact with a devil. Melander put away the tortoiseshell stone and continued forward. Then should we do some preparation work? Like setting up a spell formation or something? Noah quickly followed. No need. That thing is so scary. Are we just going to face it head-on? I feel a little scared. Noah was a little hesitant. Let's just take a look. There's no rush. Grandpa, then what's the difference between you and the scumbag who just rubbed against me and didn't go in? Noah rolled his eyes. You always get carried away when you see something related to ghosts. If I encounter something I can't beat, I'll naturally calm down, Melander said calmly. Noah was actually speechless. However, he had seen how fierce his grandpa was with his own eyes. Although he was a little nervous, he wasn't scared off just like that. He continued to follow, but his footsteps were obviously a little slower. He was about half a step behind Melander. If there were any special circumstances, he could just hide behind him. Melander followed the tortoiseshell stone's guidance, and they arrived at the entrance of a restaurant located in the corner of Amy's. "Grandpa, is it the prison next door, or this one?" Noah looked at the rather luxurious restaurant in front of him, and then looked at the high walls of the Bowtie prison not far away. This restaurant looked quite high class, but it seemed to be closed after business hours. As for the Bowtie prison next door, they had seen it from another entrance yesterday, and it didn't seem to be a problem. "It's here." Melander tapped the bamboo pole in his hand lightly on the ground, facing the entrance of the restaurant. "Then let me set up a spell formation." Noah jumped back and took out a string of tortoiseshell of various sizes. He raised his hand, and the tortoiseshell fell to the ground, forming a ring with him in the middle. "Go knock on the door." Melander tilted his head. "I just finished setting up this spell formation." "Grandpa, why don't you go knock on it?" Noah was instantly terrified. "Any unnecessary movements will affect my ability. Knocking on the door is a small matter, so naturally, I can only leave it to you." Melander held the bamboo pole upright, and the tortoiseshell stone in his hand was already floating in the air. His white hair fluttered in the wind, and his expression was solemn. Noah gulped. This was the first time he had seen his grandpa so nervous. After hesitating for a while, he still walked out of the tortoiseshell circle and sneakily knocked on the door twice. Then, he jumped back into the tortoiseshell circle with 2 big strides, and made a defensive posture. After a while, the door of the restaurant slowly opened, and a little half-elf girl walked out. Chapter 1977. Noah almost jumped up and used Almighty Dragon of Heaven. Oh no, it was Turtle Shellbind. But when he saw the little half-elf girl poking her head and half her body out, the turtle shell in his hand stopped in its tracks. The little girl was too young. She looked like she was only 3 or 4 years old, and she was too cute. Her silvery hair was let down, and her delicate and cute face had a little baby fat. Her blue eyes were as bright as sapphires, and she had a pair of translucent pointy ears. She looked like a little angel, tilting her head and looking at them with a puzzled expression. "Excuse me, is there anything I can help you with?" the little girl asked in a soft voice. Looking at a turtle." Noah responded quickly. He put down the turtle shell he had raised above his head and forced a smile. "But yours is a turtle shell." Amy saw through him immediately. Although it's only a tortoise shell now, it was once a high-spirited tortoise. Back then, it was young and didn't know how to cherish it. It fell in love with a fish and risked its life for her. It was only when it lost its body that it regretted it and left behind this tortoise shell. Noah raised its chin slightly and said affectionately, "So, those turtle shells on the ground all have stories." Amy took out a small stool from somewhere and sat down at the door. She rested her chin on her hands and looked at Noah with great interest. Behind her, 2 more little heads popped out and looked at Noah curiously. "My turtles." Noah looked at the 3 little guys who were looking at him expectantly and felt a little awkward. It was easy for him to make up a story, but there were a total of 36 turtle shells on the ground. If he had to make up a story for each of them, was he even human? "Grandpa, these 3 little girls don't look like they have anything to do with that thing. Did you make a mistake?" Noah wanted to slip away, so he turned his head and asked softly. "Hey, kid, go and call your father out," Melander said to the pillar beside him. "Hey, Grandpa Blind, I'm over here," Amy said. She looked at Melander and said, "Do you need my father for something? He just finished his work and needs to rest now. You can tell me if there's anything." And stood in front of Jessica and looked at Melander warily. Melander's white eyes suddenly turned towards and, revealing a look of bewilderment. The tortoise-shell stone floating in front of him suddenly spun wildly. "Is there a guest?" At this moment, a gentle voice came from the restaurant. Meg walked out and stood in front of Anne. At the same time, he looked at the two people outside the door. The old man and the young man were dressed rather strangely. The old man's hair and beard were all white, and he wore a set of ragged clothes. His complexion was green, and his complexion was not too good. His eyes were green and white, with only the whites of his eyes visible. There was a thin bamboo pole in front of him, and on top of that bamboo pole was a rotating tortoise shell. The young man next to him was dressed rather normally. He wore a green short jacket and cotton pants, and carried a large bag on his back. However, his fluffy red hairstyle was too eye-catching, and people's attention would be focused on his hair. It had the effect of gaining the upper hand by a show of strength. However, under such a dazzling hairstyle, there was a rather young and obedient face. He looked to be in his early 20s. His skin was fair, his facial features were distinct, and he had a pair of clear brown eyes. If his hair was trimmed, he would be very attractive to young ladies and rich aunties. The restaurant's lunch hours have ended. If you want to eat, please come back in the evening, Meg said with a smile. Noah looked at Meg nervously. He put down the tortoise shell in his hand and picked it up again. He glanced at Melander from the corner of his eyes, waiting for his signal. We're not here to eat, Melander said, his white eyes staring at Meg. All right, you guys go play in the amusement park on the second floor. I've changed a new toy for you guys, Meg said to the three little guys with a smile. Really? What new toy? Let's go. The three little guys ran into the restaurant happily. After the children left, Meg still had a smile on his face, but his voice became colder. If you're not here to eat, turn right and walk forward. You'll find all kinds of fun things. Turn left and walk forward. The scenery is not bad. You're not simple. Melander had no intention of leaving. He was still staring at Meg. Yes. I should be the best chef in Chaos City now. Those who have eaten my dishes all think I'm not simple. Meg nodded matter-of-factly. You've seen things you shouldn't have, Melander said. Where did this old man come from? Meg's heart skipped a beat. He began to judge whether this was a scammer or a mysterious person with some skills. That little girl just now is not a normal person either. There shouldn't be any pure people in this world, Melander continued. Meg opened the door, and said to the two of them, come in for a cup of tea. If you have something to say it outside. We don't drink tea. Noah said nervously. He couldn't see through Meg's realm at all. Either he was a weak weakling, or he was a powerhouse countless times more powerful than him. All right. Melander kept the tortoise-shell stone, and walked to the restaurant with the bamboo pole. Noah quickly tugged at the corner of his shirt, and softly said, Grandpa, isn't this a little inappropriate? Melander patted his hand gently, and gestured for him to calm down. Then, he stepped into the restaurant. No demon cave, no demon spawn. I'm going all out. Noah kept the tortoise-shell stone formation, and followed him into the restaurant. The restaurant's door closed slowly behind them. Noah looked back and swallowed his saliva. He held the tortoise-shell tightly in his hand, and was prepared to use tortoise-shell bind on that fellow to make him lose his ability to resist. Just find a seat, Meg said casually, and went into the kitchen. Noah sat next to Melander, who was sitting by the window, and asked softly, Grandpa, it's him. The tortoise-shell stone is looking for him. Melander nodded. Then if we don't make a move now, when should we? Noah jumped up from the chair. The tortoiseshell had already spread out, and formed a tortoiseshell stone formation under his feet. You're already an adult. Be more mature. Melander frowned. Don't set up a defensive formation so easily. You'll lose your momentum. Isn't this what you taught me? The one who survives to the end is the winner. Noah was not embarrassed at all. Meg came over with the brewed black tea, and poured a cup for each of them. As soon as he put down the cup, he looked at Melander and asked, "Who are you people?" Chapter 1978. Once an expert opened his mouth, one would know whether he was right or not. Melander's first few sentences already gave Mag a rough idea of what was going on. This blind old man did have something up his sleeve. Although the old man didn't say anything, Meg knew very well that that thing had something to do with the great old one. Moreover, when they entered the door, the information that the omniscient door gave him made him interested. The old man's name was Melant. He was over 700 years old. He was a 10th-tier ghost with severe cataracts. The young one was called Noah. He was 20 years old. He was also a 7th-tier ghost. He could be considered a gifted existence among the younger generation. During this period of time, Mag had read many official and unofficial histories about the history of the Norland continent. He had seen some information about ghosts in one of the unofficial histories. They were a demonic race, but they had gone extinct during the war among species 500 years ago. From the limited information he had, they were an extremely mysterious race. And in that unofficial history, there was a mention of some strange behaviors of the ghosts. It was said that the powerful ghosts could control corpses to fight. There were even rumors that they were the devil's spokesperson in this world. Perhaps it was because of these reasons that the ghosts had always maintained a high level of mystery, but they still disappeared in history. However, looking at the grandfather and grandson in front of him, Meg had a rough idea in his heart. The ghosts might not have gone extinct, but they were living a very low-key life. As for why they came looking for him, and how they could tell that and was extraordinary, he was also curious. Melant looked at Meg, and asked, "Who are you?" "The owner of this restaurant. The person who will serve you." Meg leaned back in his chair. "You've seen the devil," Melant said calmly. Noah held the turtle shell nervously and stared at Meg. "Seems like you've seen it too." Meg leaned forward slightly and stared into Melant's greenish-white eyes. Melant was silent for a while. Suddenly, he broke into a smile. "Seems like he couldn't persuade you. I'm a person who can withstand temptation. His tricks don't work on me." Meg also smiled. "But, how did you get rid of it?" "Maybe he didn't expect me to be blind, so his trick didn't work on me," Melanti said. Noah was stunned. He didn't understand what they were talking about, but he could tell that his grandfather wasn't hostile to this guy, so he relaxed a little. "Why are you looking for me?" Meg picked up the teacup and blew on it. "You might not know this, but these things are actually sealed. But recently, half of them escaped. I want to find him and seal him again. The tortoise-shell stone led me to you." Melander looked at Meg. "I think you should know where to find him. Since your so-called tortoise-shell stone can lead you to me, you should also be able to find him." "I don't know where he is." Meg shook his head. He was a little surprised that Melant's tortoise-shell stone could lead them to Mamis. Meg didn't want to expose his identity now, so he looked at this pair of grandfather and grandson. He was already thinking if it was necessary to silence them. The tortoise-shell stone's detection range is limited. The Norland continent is too big, and that guy is too cunning. Finding him is like finding a needle in a haystack. Melant shook his head. "How far away can it detect him?" 500 miles, Melant said. "If that's the case, I can't help you." Meg shook his head. The Norland continent was billions of square kilometers. Using a detector with a range of 500 miles to find the Great Old One was indeed like looking for a needle in a haystack. "I need the help of that girl, the pure one," Mellant said to Meg. "She's not the pure one. She's my daughter. You'd better not have any ideas about her." Meg's voice became a little cold. "The tortoiseshell stone didn't find you. It found her," Mellant said. "Then it's your stupid stone that's the problem." Meg took a sip of tea and put down the teacup. "If there's nothing else, I'll see you out. Since you've seen him, then you should know how scary he is. He broke free from the seal, and could bring destruction to this world. What you're doing now is like his accomplice." Mellant frowned. "Since you've seen him, then you should know that with your abilities, even if you find him, you're no match for him, let alone reseal him." Meg looked at Mellant and said, "You ghosts keep a low profile. Why are you so concerned about him?" Noah's hand under the table was still holding the tortoiseshell tightly. His palm was already sweaty, but he didn't dare to relax. Judging from his grandfather's behavior, this fellow should be a powerhouse. Otherwise, he would be lying on the ground now. He was surprised that such a young-looking human could make his grandfather wary. However, Noah was also curious about Meg's question. He had asked his grandfather more than once, but he never got an answer. Mellant was silent for a long time, then sighed and said, "Because I want to break the curse on the ghosts. If he fully recovers his strength, the nobles will become his slaves. This is the price I had to pay to break free from his illusion. How can I be sure that you're telling the truth?" Meg frowned slightly. Mellant took Noah's left hand from under the table and pulled up his sleeve, revealing his wrist. There was a red and black skull mark on his wrist. Then, Mellant pulled up his own sleeve. There was an identical red and black skull mark on the same place. "This is a bloodline curse. The few remaining members of the ghost race are all cursed. If they can't be sealed, this curse will become a channel for him to control the ghost race." Mellant pulled down his sleeve and looked at Meg, and said, "I know you're very strong, and I don't have the confidence to beat you. However, since you've seen him, you must have paid a price to break free. I hope that we can work together to find him and reseal him or kill him. I won't hurt that little girl, but I need a bit of her essence blood to expand the range of the tortoiseshell stone. I hope you can agree." Unexpected mission triggered, request from Mellant. As one of the few existences with the ability to find the Great Old Ones, Mellant requests the host to establish a cooperative relationship with him. Set out to find the Great Old Ones who escaped the seal and reseal them. Mission reward, Chance of the Wheel of Fortune X3. The system's voice suddenly sounded in Meg's mind. Chapter 1979. "We can work together, but I have 3 conditions," Meg said to Mellant calmly. "Tell me." Mellant's greenish-white eyes seemed to sparkle. "Firstly, after we work together, I will be the leader of all operations. You have to cooperate with me and not act on your own. Secondly, our cooperation is completely confidential, and no third party can know about this. I think this is what you want too. Thirdly, and can provide a drop of blood essence, but other than that, you can't ask for anything else. Otherwise, I will terminate the cooperation in my own way," Meg said calmly. Mellant thought for a while, and nodded seriously. "I agree to your conditions." Noah's mouth was slightly agape. He didn't expect Mellant to agree to such harsh conditions. "Happy cooperation." Meg raised his teacup. "Happy cooperation." Mellant and Noah raised their cups too, and finished it in one gulp. After confirming the cooperation, the atmosphere became much more relaxed. Noah kept his tortoise shell, and smilingly asked, "Then, when are we going to catch the devil? Is that fellow really in Chaos City?" Chaos City is only so big, and you only found me here. That means that fellow isn't here at all. Meg shook his head. Although the system's detection ability was not as good as a rock, if the Great Old One had appeared in Chaos City, it wouldn't be completely unresponsive. You know where he is? Mellant asked Meg. I can only say that I'm guessing. Yesterday, when the Roth Empire launched a war against the orcs and elves, I found a corpse whose blood essence had been sucked dry at the scene in the Twilight Forest. I also found a ghostly aura with strong energy. I think this has something to do with the devil. Meg took out the photo stone, and played the tragic scene in the Twilight Forest for Mellant and Noah to see. This is the massacre after the war. Mellant frowned slightly. But this could be a war caused by the devil. The Roth Empire's second prince, Josh, could have sold his soul to the devil. Then, he took the opportunity when the king and the first prince were attending the peace conference in Chaos City to start the war, and ordered the massacre of all the tribes that were conquered. The image stopped at the corpse whose blood essence had been sucked dry. This is... Mellant suddenly stood up, and looked at that corpse in shock. You've seen it before? Meg asked. These are the corpses left behind by people who were controlled by demons to strengthen themselves. They absorbed the resentment and blood essence of corpses that had just died not long ago. 500 years ago, I met a demon who was controlled by demons. Back then, he massacred many small villages and left behind corpses like this. Mellant nodded with a solemn expression. I didn't expect to see it again. Meg was deep in thought. This was basically in line with his deduction. He said, I'm not sure where to look for the escaped half of the demon, but Joshua might be a breakthrough direction. We have to find him first and capture or kill him to prevent him from growing and becoming the next demon. He's the devil's representative. Once he's strong enough, the devil will personally find him and take away his body. We need to find him as soon as possible. Mellant nodded. We'll depart tonight. I'll bring you to the Twilight Forest. That's where he was last seen. Meg set a time. That little girl's blood essence, I'll give it to you tonight. All right, I won't disturb you any further. Mellant nodded and left with Noah. Meg didn't get up to see his guest out. Instead, he poured himself another cup of tea. Uniting all forces to deal with the Great Old Ones was his current priority. The Norland continent's anti-Great Old Ones alliance had basically taken shape. However, the enemy was in the dark while they were out in the open. Everyone was at a loss, and they couldn't pinpoint the location of the demon. No matter how many people they had, it was useless. Melante's tortoiseshell stone was rather mysterious. It could detect the existence of the demon. He could even find Anne, who had been successfully purified. It was enough to show that he was quite skilled and had the demeanor of a reclusive expert. He had to find Joshua and kill him before he caused even more trouble. Amy poked her head out from the corner of the stairs, and asked Meg, who was drinking tea alone, Father, are those two guys bad guys? Not really. Meg shook his head with a smile, and waved to the little one. Amy came to Meg, and looked into his eyes. The sound of the flute moved. If you are threatened, blink. No one is threatening me. Meg smiled and patted the little one's head. It seemed like she was still worried about him when she went upstairs. He couldn't help but feel touched. I'm super powerful now. If there are bad guys who want to hurt Father, you must tell me. I'll beat them up for you. Amy clenched her little fists. I'm super fierce. My little tiger is super fierce. Meg nodded with a smile. However, the little one's fierce look was too cute. It didn't have any deterrence at all. It even made people want to pinch her little cheeks. Hee hee. Amy fell into Meg's arms, and rubbed her little head against Meg's chest. Then, shall we still have roast goose for dinner? Grandpa, can we trust that guy? Do we really have to listen to his orders? Noah asked softly as he followed Melanti out of Amy's. I heard that a young human was very powerful recently. He killed many people. Benson, Weston, Bruno, and the others all fell under his sword. Melander's tone was filled with emotion. These were all powerful people from the same era as him. You're saying that he's Alex? Noah's eyes widened in shock. A 30-year-old human can give me such a strong sense of pressure. Other than him, there shouldn't be another one. Melanti nodded slightly. But he's the #1 knight on the Norland continent. He's a dragon slayer warrior who can kill giant dragons in the sky. He's a terrifying existence who killed the king of the forest trolls. How did he become the owner of a restaurant and a stay-at-home dad with a child? Noah was still in disbelief. They had been traveling around the Norland continent all these years, and he had heard many rumors. Alex's story was his favorite. Alex was a legend. He had already transcended species, and became the legend of the entire Norland continent. A human, a sword, and a purple-striped griffin. He had killed all the powerhouses in the world, and even captured the heart of the beautiful elven princess. He had always been Noah's idol. However, such a super powerhouse had now become the owner of a restaurant and a stay-at-home dad with 3 children. Everyone has their own life and secrets. If you want to live longer, it's best not to try to find out other people's secrets, Melanti said calmly. Noah had a bunch of questions that were at the tip of his tongue, but he swallowed them back down. He turned to look at Mamie Restaurant, and thought to himself, I don't care about the secret, but I can build a good relationship with my idol. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. A catastrophe is coming. I wonder if she can bear the heavy responsibility of saving the world. Outside the city gate of Chaos City, the bishop in a white robe put down his hat and looked at the city gate tower in a daze. Sir, it's time to go, the people in the queue behind urged. Sorry. The bishop retracted his gaze and nodded slightly. He followed the crowd into Chaos City. Put the entire city on alert. Strengthen the checks before entering the city. All the outposts are under surveillance at all times. Guard against any possible invaders. Assemble a rapid response team. Get ready to reinforce the peace alliance at any time. The war may start at any time. You have to be 120% alert. Michael said to the City Lord's Castle's officials in the meeting hall with a serious expression. Everyone left the meeting and went back to work. The peace conference was suddenly stopped, and the Roth Empire started a war. The City Lord's castle quickly became busy. City Lord, Lewis has already arrived at the meeting hall, Dicus said. I'll go over now. Michael picked up his teacup and finished the water in it. He stood up and walked out as he said, Is our inquiry document ready? Yes, it's ready. We rewrote it according to your suggestions yesterday. We're just about to show it to you. Dicus nodded. Wait a while. I'll meet Lewis first. Michael nodded and quickened his steps. After the war started, Michael almost didn't have any rest. He originally thought that the Roth Empire just wanted to increase their bargaining chip for the negotiation. However, from the results, this war had exceeded everyone's expectations. The Roth Empire's methods were even crueler than the racial war back then. They slaughtered dozens of orc tribes and almost took down the August tribe. They killed more than 50,000 innocent orcs. This was a huge blow to the orcs, and also an indelible hatred. Meanwhile, the elves' casualties were slightly better. The defense of the City of Life was very successful, and Irina's timely arrival prevented the situation from worsening. However, after being attacked by their most trusted neighbor, and almost having their core main city breached, and the Tree of Life almost destroyed, the elves probably couldn't trust their ally, the Roth Empire. All the races increased the level of war. The powerhouses stayed in their races to guard against any possible situations. There was no hope for the peace treaty to be renewed, and a new round of racial war could break out any time. Now, all the races were in danger. Michael, the giant dragons have reached an agreement internally. If the Roth Empire doesn't give a satisfactory response to this matter, the giant dragons will send an expeditionary force to the Roth Empire, Lewis said directly as he looked at Michael, who walked in. Michael sat down opposite Lewis. After some thought, he nodded and said, Chaos City will respond to the giant dragon's decision in the name of the Peace Alliance. We will also send an elite team to attack the Roth Empire together with the giant dragons. All right, I will pass on your words. Lewis nodded and said, however, does Alex have any news about the devil? I haven't received any more news from him, but I believe he has been investigating this matter. Michael shook his head. All right. I still have to make a trip to the goblins and dwarves now. I hope you can pass on any news about the devil to us, the giant dragons, immediately, Lewis said as he stood up. All right. Michael also stood up to send him off. The roast goose became an instant hit, and became the favorite food of the gluttons because of its unique texture and wonderful taste that was irresistible. Meg wasn't surprised at all. Even he couldn't resist the temptation of the roast goose. After the dinner service ended, Meg bought a blood extraction and preservation device from the system, and drew a drop of blood from Anne's finger. The two children were a little tired after playing for the whole day. They fell asleep before Meg could finish his story. I know 2 people from the Ghost Tribe. They might be able to find Josh and the great old one who escaped from the seal. I am going to the Twilight Forest with them tonight, Meg said to Irina, who was leaning against the door frame, after he walked out of the room. That old man looks a little strange. Are you sure he's all right? Irina looked out the window. Melander and Noah were already waiting under a tree in the park not far away. They found me with a piece of tortoiseshell stone and said that they sensed the aura of the great old one from me. I think he does have some ability. Meg nodded. This kind of human flesh detector was hard to come by. Compared to running around like a headless fly, it was obviously more efficient to use a radar with a coverage of 500 kilometers. Be careful, Irina reminded. Okay. Meg nodded slightly, turned around, and went downstairs. Here's what you want. Meg threw the small crystal bottle in his hand to Melander. Melander reached out and caught it. He raised the small crystal bottle to the moon, and a drop of pale golden blood shone like a gem. He is indeed a pure blood. Even his blood is so pure. Melander was a little dazed. Hello. After knowing Meg's identity, Noah's attitude was obviously much more humble. The way he looked at Meg also changed a little, with a little more admiration. Yes, hello. Meg nodded slightly. He had a good impression of this boy with a shamade hairstyle. After that, he said, it's time to set off. All right, let's set off now. Melander kept the small crystal bottle carefully. Not long after, a purple-striped griffin left Chaos City quietly, and flew towards the Twilight Forest. Should I call you Mr. Alex or Mr. Mac? Noah asked nervously as he sat at the side and looked at Meg. Up to you, Meg said casually. Noah even specially came to the restaurant for dinner tonight. Then I'll call you Mr. Mac. It feels more intimate that way. Noah grinned and sat closer to Meg. It was as if their relationship had really become much closer after changing the way he addressed him. My name is Noah. Ark? Ha. Nothing. Ark. This nickname is fine too. You can call me whatever you want. Noah chuckled. His bootlicker nature was fully displayed. Meg agreed, and was about to close his eyes to rest for a while. I didn't expect you to be an excellent chef at the same time as a powerful knight. You must be very hard-working, right? Noah asked as he looked at him expectantly. No, this is just my talent. It has nothing to do with hard work. Just like how you can't beat me no matter how hard you work, Meg said calmly. Chapter 1980. Noah choked a little. He looked at Meg in silence for a while and tried to ease the awkwardness. Mr. Mac, it's nice to meet you. How nice. Meg looked at him and asked seriously. I'm very happy. Noah was about to cry. Then it's too early for you to be happy. Usually, people who work with me are very tired, Meg said calmly. I'm not afraid of being tired. I just like working with you. It gives me face. Noah chuckled. He would be proud to tell others about it in the future. But I'm afraid I'll be a burden. Meg looked at him. Noah was speechless. All right, there was nothing to talk about. It was the first time Noah felt a blow from a big boss. It hurt him a lot. Although my grandson is useless, he can still be a bait, Melanti, who had been silent all this time, said. Noah widened his eyes and looked at Melanti in disbelief. Was this the reason why Grandpa brought him along? That's it. Demons usually don't like him. Meg shook his head. That's true. He's too ordinary. Melanti nodded. Noah slowly sat at the back and hugged his knees, feeling depressed. The purple-striped griffin flew very fast. In less than 3 hours, they could see the twilight forest from afar. Melanti had also dripped En's blood into the tortoiseshell stone during the journey. The red lines on the tortoiseshell stone turned golden. The closer they got to the twilight forest, the more golden spots shone on the tortoiseshell stone. It was like a starry sky. He did appear here, and he didn't stay in one place. Melanti looked at the tortoiseshell stone floating and spinning in front of him with a serious expression. Let's go to the nearest marked spot. Meg glanced at the tortoiseshell stone and rode the purple-striped griffin downwards. The golden spots got closer and closer, and the ruins of a tribe gradually appeared in everyone's sight. The once prosperous middle-sized tribe had been burned to the ground. The scene should have been cleaned up by the orcs of other tribes. In the middle of the tribe, there was a tall mound with a blackened stone pillar. The top of the stone pillar was carved with a cheetah, which should be the tribe's totem. After confirming that there was no one around, the purple-striped griffin landed on the ground. He stopped here not too long ago. Judging from the devil chi, he shouldn't be the devil's true form. However, this guy who sold his soul has fallen deeply into the demonic path. After absorbing a lot of blood essence and resentment, his strength has skyrocketed. He will be more and more difficult to deal with. Melanti walked around the ruins and finally stood in front of the mound in the center. He said with a solemn expression. How strong? Meg asked with a frown. Initially, Joshua was only a mage who had yet to reach the 7th tier. While he could not be said to be completely powerless, he was not a threat at all. However, after single-handedly causing this war and massacre, his strength had skyrocketed by absorbing resentment and blood essence. That was not a good thing. Melanti sat cross-legged and formed a seal with his hands. He took out a golden red talisman from somewhere and held it between 2 of his fingers. He muttered something and pointed at the mound in front of him. The golden red talisman burst into flames and floated toward the mound, then merged with it. The ground suddenly began to shake, and the mound that was pressed tightly together also began to sway. The soil rustled and fell. Is the corpse coming to life? Meg subconsciously took 2 steps back. The night was cold, and so many orcs had just died here. Seeing the mound of graves trembling, as if something was about to crawl out of the ground, it was a little creepy. Mr. Mac, don't be nervous. My grandfather is communicating with them, Noah said with a smile. He did not expect Alex to be afraid of ghosts too. Ghosts can communicate. Meg frowned. Yes, we are ghosts. Isn't it normal for us to communicate with ghosts? Noah nodded. Look, we don't look like ghosts. Meg was deep in thought. It seemed that he had to look up more information about ghosts when he went back. He knew too little about them. The ground suddenly stopped shaking, and a broken face appeared on the stone pillar. It used a strange tone to communicate with Melanti, but it quickly dissipated. Melanti sighed and slowly stood up. He said in a low voice, the bodies were burned, and the souls were stolen and devoured. Only a few remnant souls managed to escape, so there was not much information. That guy was wearing a black robe, and his strength was above level 9. He might have reached level 10. If there are enough remnant souls and resentment, you can get more information, right? Meg asked. Yes, the bodies can talk because the souls will not disappear immediately. The resentment can exist for a long time. The more complete the soul, the more information can be obtained. Melanti nodded. Then I'll take you to a place. Meg jumped back onto the griffin's back and left with Melanti and Noah. Soon, the griffin landed in a ruin 100 miles away. Just like the previous tribe, this place had been cleaned up. The tall tombstones looked very lonely, and the occasional crow's cry added to the chill. This was the tribe that Meg came to yesterday. The resentment here is quite strong. It was not completely devoured, Melanti said in surprise as soon as they landed. I came here yesterday. He must have sensed my presence, so he left in a hurry. He did not have time to completely absorb the resentment, Meg said. I see. Then it's easy. Melanti nodded. He did not waste any more time. He sat down in front of the tombstones and began to cast the spell again. Meg's heart skipped a beat when he saw the green resentment emerging from the tombstones. He looked at Melante's back, and couldn't help but think of the Taoist priest who vanquished demons. This ghost tribe was a little different from what he had imagined. They were not named because their abilities were similar to ghosts, or because they looked strange. Instead, they were named because they could communicate with ghosts. About 10 minutes later, Melander, who had said something to the group of ghosts, recited an obscure incantation. The lingering aura of resentment gradually dissipated, and the surroundings returned to normal. They said the one who devoured the resentment was a terrifying young man. They couldn't see his face clearly, but he had a terrifying aura. He was at the 9th tier, and had yet to reach the 10th tier. He appeared not long after the tribe was massacred. However, he left in a hurry for some reason, Melanti said to Meg as he stood up. Meg nodded slightly, and said, looks like we can basically confirm that it was Josh who did it. Chaos City is currently investigating the Ministry of War. He should have initiated this war without Andre's permission just to absorb the resentment of these innocent people who were slaughtered. Chapter 1981. Meg's voice was a little cold, and so was his heart. He had killed tens of thousands of innocent people for his own selfish desire to become stronger. Such behavior was no different from that of a devil. Melant looked at Meg and said, we need to find him as soon as possible. With his current power, he can easily destroy a town without powerhouses guarding it. The more people he kills, the stronger he will become. It's not just killing people. His motive is probably to start a new racial war. If it's just 1 or 2 small villages, he won't be satisfied either, Meg said in a low voice. You know him very well. I do know a lot about the enemy. Meg laughed self-deprecatingly. It was a pity that he didn't kill Josh back then because he thought he knew him very well. That was why there was such a massacre today. Then where can we go to find him? Mellant asked. Let's sweep through the Twilight Forest first. If there's nothing there, we'll enter the borders of the Roth Empire and do a sweep. Meg thought for a while, and said, before the cleanup is completed, Andre won't be in a hurry to start a new war. He's someone who needs to have complete control of the situation. However, Josh won't wait. He will definitely start a new conflict. It's completely reasonable for the orcs to launch a revenge attack on the Roth Empire now. Alright, we'll look for him according to your judgment. Mellant nodded. He didn't doubt Meg's judgment at all. Impressive. I didn't expect Alex to not only be powerful, but he's also an outstanding strategist. It's really admirable. Noah looked at Meg with admiration. Everyone boarded the Griffin again, and Meg got Ozzy to start scanning the Twilight Forest. The scanning distance of 250 kilometers allowed the originally difficult carpet search to be realized. However, the Twilight Forest was very vast. Even with Ozzy's speed, it still took them 2 hours to finish the sweep. The purple-striped griffin stopped at the edge of the Twilight Forest, and Mellant said, he only stayed for a short while at the few suspicious places. From the traces of the demonic aura, he might have entered the Roth Empire, or gone to the north where there are few people. Let's go to the borders to take a look. Meg nodded. He rode the purple-striped griffin into the Roth Empire's borders, and began to patrol along the borders. After entering the Roth Empire, the presence of the demonic aura became much weaker. It was scattered, but there was no order or pattern. In the end, it disappeared mysteriously, and there was no trace of it at all. Melander's expression was a little complicated. He said in a low voice, he should have found a way to hide his demon aura. I'm afraid it's impossible to find him by following his demon aura. We can only continue to investigate. As long as he appears in the range of the hybrid turtle shell stone, we can lock him down. Meg looked at the gradually brightening sky. After searching for an entire night, he still couldn't find Josh. That guy's anti-reconnaissance ability was the most troublesome. It's time for me to go back. I'll leave this place to you guys. Keep in touch at all times. If you find someone, don't be in a hurry to take action. Let me know first. I'll rush over as soon as possible, Meg said to the two of them. Alright, you must have something very important to do. Please take care. Noah nodded with an understanding expression. It's nothing important. My wife and children are waiting at home. I'll go back and have an early sleep, Meg said calmly. Noah opened his mouth and revealed a bitter smile. Listen, is this something a human would say? Let's go. Meg patted Ozzy's back, and Ozzy rose into the air and flew in the direction of Chaos City. Meanwhile, Meg closed his eyes and began to rest. Grandpa, what should we do now? Noah asked dejectedly. They were the only ones left in the quiet mountain ridge. I saw a military camp over there just now. Go get an ironback eagle, and we'll continue to patrol. Now that we have a target, and the scanning area has expanded so much, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Melander was very excited. He didn't look tired at all even though he didn't sleep for the entire night. Alright, I'll start acting as bait. Noah turned and flew towards the military camp in the distance. He was half floating like a ghost. It was already 5:30 a.m. when Meg reached home. He went upstairs to take a shower, and meditated for 15 minutes before he got up and went downstairs to prepare breakfast and the morning service as usual. As a man who had stepped into the demigod realm, he didn't feel tired at all after a night without sleep. However, he still couldn't find Josh even though he had brought a huge human flesh scanner with him this time. That was a little disappointing. You didn't find him. Irina had come downstairs at some point. She was standing at the kitchen door and leaning against the door frame as she looked at Meg, who was in a daze while cooking the porridge. He's not in the Twilight Forest, nor at the border of the Roth Empire. I'm a little curious where that fellow is hiding. Meg stirred the porridge in the pot slowly. Andre has returned to Rodu. The possibility of him bypassing Andre and starting another war is not high unless he can become the king of the Roth Empire. Irina smiled. That's what he's been dreaming of. After absorbing the resentment and blood essence, his power is above 9th tier, but not 10th tier. It's impossible for him to kill Andre and Josh and suppress all opposition to becoming the king of the Roth Empire with this power. Meg shook his head. Even I would find it difficult to kill Andre, who is in the royal palace of Rodu. But he's Josh, one of Andre's favorite sons. He's the second prince who has the highest chance of becoming the next emperor of the Roth Empire. Furthermore, he sold his soul to the devil. This time, he was able to bypass Andre and mobilize the military to start a war against the orcs and elves at the same time. This already proves that he can't be judged by common sense. Irina's expression was very serious. Meg fell silent upon hearing that. He thought about what Irina said seriously. The power that the Great Old One gave Josh was unknown, and his identity was indeed very special. However, it's not necessarily a bad thing if Andre dies. That old fox is bad. He's harder to deal with than Josh and Sean, and he's very ambitious. Irina smiled. And as long as Josh ascends to the throne, he'll be in the open. By then, it'll be much easier for us to find and kill him. Meg nodded. Perhaps I should find time to make a trip to Rodu. The longer we delay, the stronger he'll become. I'm afraid it'll be too late when he's completely replaced by the Great Old One. I'll go with you then. Only the holy light can purify the demonic aura. I'll send him to heaven personally. Irina's voice was a little cold. Oh, yes. Do you know anything about the ghost race? Those two fellows yesterday were from the ghost race, Meg asked again. Ghost race? I think I saw some records about it in the library many years ago. Didn't this demon race go extinct in the racial war a few hundred years ago? Chapter 1982. Your Majesty, these are the testimonies of the officials from the Ministry of War. Judging from their testimonies, the second prince must have used hypnotic magic to control them and mobilized the northwestern and southeastern allied forces to attack the orcs and elves in your name, an official said respectfully as he walked into the royal study with a thick stack of testimonies in his hands. Andre flipped through the report at the top and slammed his hand on the table. A bunch of trash. The official shuddered slightly and lowered his head even more. Lock up the officials from the Ministry of War first. Don't let any of them out, and don't let any related news leak out. Andre quickly regained his composure and said in a low voice, capture all the mages from the Mage Tower who came into contact with Josh that day, and then have Richard come to see me. Yes, Your Majesty, the official replied and quickly left. Very good. After so many years, you've finally come up with something different for me. I'd like to see what exactly you want. The door of the Imperial study slowly closed, but Andre's face revealed a cold smile that was hard to decipher. He was the one who had created the situation of two sons fighting for the throne. The road to the throne had always been full of thorns and blood, which could very well enhance a person's strategy and courage, thereby nurturing a cold-blooded and powerful monarch. That was how he had gotten to the throne back then, so he gave Josh an opportunity and Sean a threat. Over the years, Sean had been running the military wholeheartedly, constantly making contributions on the northwestern front line and gaining a lot of support and prestige in the military. Josh, on the other hand, had become the disciple of the Mage Tower's president and had shown his prowess in the officialdom, gaining the support of many civil officials. However, the two of them seemed to be on par, but in Andre's eyes, it was still not enough. Back then, as the sixth prince, he had defeated his brothers one by one and finally ascended to the throne. However, Josh's plan to assassinate Alex and cut off one of Sean's arms came as a surprise to him. Back then, Alex's achievements overshadowed the Emperor's, and his close relationship with Sean did indeed make him a little wary, so he did not stop Josh's actions and even secretly removed some obstacles for him. What he didn't expect was that Sean had also become Josh's accomplice in this operation, which led to the assassination on that rainy night. This eliminated his doubts about Sean and greatly reduced Sean's courage and strategy in his mind. If Sean had saved Alex at all costs that rainy night, he might be the one sitting here now. In the end, Joshua did not kill Alex. Instead, he crippled him and allowed him to leave, creating the current situation where the father and son had a powerful mortal enemy. It was an extremely foolish decision. However, although Alex was strong, he was not invincible. As long as he stayed in the palace, even Alex would not dare to barge in and kill him. The threat of his death was not unsolvable to Joshua. However, right at this time, Josh had taken advantage of the fact that they were heading to Chaos City to wage war against both the orcs and elves. Furthermore, he had issued an order to slaughter both of them. What was the reason for that? Andre had been thinking about it for a day and a night, but he still could not figure it out. If they wanted to catch the orcs off guard, they had grasped the opportunity. If they had mobilized the troops from the other military regions in advance and formulated a more complete battle plan, they might really have been able to take down the entire Twilight Forest. However, what was the reason for attacking the Wind Forest? As one of the few friendly neighbors of the Roth Empire, the elves had maintained a good relationship with them for thousands of years. However, the battle that almost invaded the City of Life had completely destroyed this relationship, and pushed the elves to the side of the Peace Alliance. Regardless of whether it was war or negotiation, Josh had thrown out his best card in advance. Unfilial son, you've ruined me. Andre sighed heavily. Bastard. 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 Oster slammed the table as he listened to his subordinate's report of the orcs' casualties. Most of the tribes at the border were in the war faction that relied on the August tribe. They had been fighting against the Roth Empire for many years, and had maintained their bloodthirst and combat power. However, the Roth Empire's invasion this time had massacred dozens of tribes, and caused the war faction's scale and numbers to be greatly reduced. Even the August tribe was almost conquered. We don't have any powerhouses left to guard us. We can't resist their cavalry. An injured orc chief said softly. Shut up. Oster glanced at him coldly. The orcs in the tent were all looking at Oster with a dark expression. They wanted to say something, but they did not. Oster was afraid of Alex, so he brought all the 10th-tier powerhouses with him when he went to participate in the peace conference. He even brought some 9th-tier powerhouses with him as guards. This caused the orcs to not have enough powerhouses to fight against the enemy's powerhouses when the Roth Empire's northwestern allied army invaded. There was no one to organize them, and all the tribes fought on their own. Thus, they were defeated one by one. Why don't we join the Peace Alliance too? The Roth Empire is too powerful. Our power has been greatly reduced, and we can't fight against them anymore. A tribal chief broke the silence. I agree too. The orcs have split into two factions internally. The peace faction is stronger than us now. I'm afraid we can't even defeat the dwarves and goblins. How are we going to fight against the Roth Empire? Another tribal chief quickly chimed in. I don't agree. The Roth Empire has killed so many of our people and massacred so many of our tribes. If we join the Peace Alliance, shouldn't we take revenge for them? You may be able to swallow such humiliation, but I can't. That's right. We should also organize a group of powerhouses to attack the Roth Empire and massacre dozens of their cities to take revenge for our people. Another voice of objection sounded immediately. The war faction and both sides quickly fell into a heated debate. Some even drew out their weapons, looking like they were going to spill blood if they disagreed. Oster knew he was in the wrong. He looked at the tribal chiefs who were gradually getting out of control with a dark expression. In the central square of the Falk tribe, there were dozens of carriages loaded with all kinds of materials parked there. Connie stood in front of a carriage and said to the orc leading the team, "Send this batch of materials to the Crow tribe overnight. They have suffered heavy losses in this war. I will get 3 magic casters who are good at healing to bring the herbs along with you." "Yes, Chief. I will ensure that the materials are delivered safely," that orc replied respectfully. "Also, this batch of materials is for the Chilla tribe. Their tribe has been breached, and they need to rebuild now." Connie pointed at the 2 carriages at the side. "Chief, the Chilla tribe is part of the war faction, right? Why should we help them?" That orc looked at and perplexedly. "When war comes, the enemy will only attack all the orc tribes that can be attacked. They won't differentiate between the war faction and the peace faction." Connie looked at that orc and shook his head slightly. "No matter which faction we belong to, we are all orcs first and foremost. We belong to the same race." That orc nodded thoughtfully. Chapter 1983. Very soon, Connie arranged all the resources in the square personally, and watched as the transportation team sent the carts of resources to the tribes that were attacked. Although the chief is young, he's very organized and approachable. He's quite similar to the old chief. "Yes. Our Falk tribe has profited from a disaster. We didn't fall into the hands of the demons, and we even got such a capable chief. The war faction has lost a lot this time because of that coward, Oster. I wonder if they will still follow that fellow to the end." Some orcs were discussing softly, and they were full of praises for Connie. Connie walked past calmly, and her slightly curled lips exposed her feelings. "Master, didn't I do very well?" "I heard a lot of praises for me," Connie said excitedly to Rex, who was sitting in the carriage, as she climbed onto a horse-drawn carriage that was parked not far away. Rex nodded expressionlessly. Not bad. This praise is not sincere at all." Connie pursed her lips, but she was still smiling. "We are going to the Hawk tribe now," Rex said to Connie. "Aren't they following Oster? Their chief wants to join us, the peace faction, but there are disagreements within the tribe. Then, are we going to persuade them?" Connie asked thoughtfully. "No, we are going to resolve the disagreements," Rex said indifferently. "Good. That's very powerful." Connie gave him a thumbs up silently. The horse-drawn carriage drove out of the Falk tribe, and quickly disappeared into the night. In this war, due to the Roth Empire's sudden attack and Oster's foolish deployment, the warring tribes have suffered heavy losses. Oster's reputation has also plummeted. Many tribes have already left the warring faction and joined us, the peace faction. We have to take this opportunity to bring them over to the peace faction so that the peace faction can represent the voice of the orcs, Rex said. Connie nodded. "Then, what are we going to do?" "You convince them with your virtue, and I will convince them with my strength," Rex said seriously. "All right." Connie also nodded seriously. The Wind Forest. An elf walked into the starry cavern, and turned to Helena, who was sitting on the platform with her back facing the cave entrance, with her legs crossed, and said, "High Priestess, the leaders of the Kint family and Bard family wish to see you in person. They have something to report to you." Helena's cold voice sounded, "Capture them and behead them in public in Life Square tomorrow. If they have anything to say, let them say it to all the elves face to face." "Yes." The elf's expression turned cold as he quickly left the cave. High Priest, please spare my life." Soon, 2 cries could be heard from outside the cave. However, the cries soon disappeared. "High Priest, more and more clans in the City of Life have announced that they will burn the slave contracts and free their slaves. The situation has gone out of control. There are also many elves marching on the streets despite the protests, saying that they want to completely eliminate slavery and make all elves equal. There are also many elven nobles and veteran nobles among them." Not long after, Elliot rushed into the starry cave abode and looked at Helena anxiously. Helena, who had her back facing the cave, finally stood up and turned to look down at Elliot. Elliot quickly said, "High Priest, we had better send the guards to capture all of them quickly. If this matter gets out of hand, it won't be easy to clean up the mess. The entire foundation of the Wind Forest will be shaken. These people are really muddle-headed. If everyone was as clear-headed as you, the Wind Forest and the City of Life would belong to the Roth Empire now," Helena said with a hint of mockery. Elliot's expression changed drastically. His knees gave way, and he knelt on the ground. He trembled as he said, "High Priest, I am absolutely loyal to the elves. I only did this because I was worried that the elves would be destroyed. However, I was really thinking for the elves wholeheartedly. I think you are just afraid of death. If your territory was in the north, you would have fled like those idiots who ran away immediately or welcomed the Roth Empire's cavalry into the forest, right?" Helena's smile became more and more mocking. How could that be? I will definitely do my best to protect the forest. I won't even dare to take a step back." Elliot's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He lowered his head and didn't dare to look at Helena. Helena stared at Elliot, who was kneeling on the ground, for a long time. Elliot's head lowered until it was buried in the ground. His body was trembling slightly. "Ha!" A disdainful and mocking laugh sounded in the cave abode. "From today onwards, you will be stripped of all your duties and identities. Go back to your castle and die alone." Helena sneered at Elliot. "This is the lightest punishment I can give you on account of Sally. You should be glad that you have a good daughter." Thank you, High Priest." Elliot seemed to have been drained of all his energy. He staggered up from the ground and scrambled out of the starry cave abode. "Men." Helena's voice came out of the cave abode. Soon, some elves entered the cave abode. "Pass down my orders. Don't stop the elves from marching on the streets. I want to see if they have made the right choice this time," Helena said calmly. "Yes." That elf left quickly. Helena actually didn't send troops to stop or arrest the marching elves. What is Helena plotting this time? Snare stood by the window on the second floor of a 2-story building. He looked at the elves marching on the streets, and the scattered guards who were watching from afar with furrowed brows. The invasion of the Roth Empire had a huge impact on the Wind Forest. When the elves discovered that the extravagant domain lords who had been granted territories chose to surrender and flee in the face of the invaders, it was the low-level elves who had been oppressed and exploited by the elves who stood up bravely and protected the City of Life and the Wind Forest just like they had 100 years ago. Elves had extremely long lifespans. Many elves who had participated in the racial war were still living in the City of Life. When their memories were awakened, they saw their brothers and friends who had fought alongside them in the past. They and their descendants had become lowly servants. The shame made them unable to enjoy everything silently. Thus, nobles began to burn slave contracts and slave contracts. More and more elves began to march on the streets demanding equality and freedom. This was a good thing, and it was also a good thing for the night elves. However, what was strange to Snare was that the elven guards didn't do anything. Helena, who had always viewed freedom as a scourge, was silently allowing this to happen in the City of Life. Chapter 1984. Although the situation is turbulent, this is not a reason for us to delay the update. Add Mr. Max Eggplant with Garlic tutorial and put it after Mr. Max interview draft. Give the cover the biggest title. I want to see this sample issue today, and the new issue will be released as usual in 3 days. Let the printing plant prepare for additional printing. In the chief editor's office, Garland looked at the editorial staff present and said seriously. But Mr. Max said before that he wanted to publish the 2 articles in 2 parts, Milo said. And if we add it at the last minute, it will take a lot of work. It will be difficult to publish the sample issue today, another supervisor in charge of typesetting said. In this situation, no one knows which will come first, tomorrow or an accident. If this is the last issue of Whole Foods, I hope it can leave something in the history of the magazine. Garland's gaze swept across everyone present. I know that all of you are passionate about this industry, and you are passionate about the magazine. Anything is possible, isn't it? The eyes of the people present lit up. They all clicked on the pictures and got up to work. After everyone left, Milo, who was still in his original position, looked at Garland suspiciously. He lowered his voice and said, "Is that really the case?" Garland closed the door behind him, walked to the desk, and sat down. He sighed faintly. Nonsense. The big boss was worried that the situation would worsen and wanted to make a last profit, so he asked me to publish Mr. Mac's article in advance. Milo smiled when he heard that. But the truth is not too far off. If this is the last issue, missing Mr. Max Eggplant with Garlic tutorial will definitely be the biggest regret. Yes, Mr. Mac is not only good at cooking, but also at writing gourmet tutorials. It even makes me wonder if he has written gourmet reviews before. Does he have a hidden identity? Garland agreed. At first, he wanted Meg to dictate, Milo to write down, and then process it into a draft. Later, Meg said that he wanted to write it himself, and he was ready to let Milo write for him. In the end, after getting Mr. Mac's manuscript, the 2 of them were shocked. The writing was smooth and natural, and the language was simple and lively. They turned a recipe tutorial into a piece of excellent and beautiful writing. It was educational and fun, and Milo admitted defeat. If she hadn't seen Mr. Mac's culinary skills in Amy's booming business, Garland would have had the urge to make Meg a professional gourmet. It would be a pity to waste such a talent. Will the situation really worsen? Milo asked softly. The citizens of Rodu were also a little uneasy these 2 days. After a long period of peace, although the Roth Empire was very powerful now, the mention of war still made people afraid. Garland sighed, then she shook her head and said, "Ordinary people like us don't know much, but I've heard that dozens of beastman tribes have been destroyed by us. This matter can't be settled peacefully, so we should pray for our own good." At noon, Meg received a letter from the editorial department of Whole Foods, informing him that the issue of Eggplant with Garlic sauce would be published in advance. Meg didn't have much of an opinion about this. Just as Garland and the rest had judged, the current situation was unstable, and no one knew what would happen tomorrow. Whether it was for economic benefits or the ideals of the magazine's editors, he could accept the issue of the tutorial being published in advance. Moreover, he now hoped that this eggplant with garlic sauce tutorial could bring him more faith. After reaching the peak of the path of becoming a knight, he could only try this path of spreading delicacies to improve his culinary skills. The turbulent situation was not conducive to the spread of delicacies. When one's life was in danger, who would care about delicacies? Survival was the most important thing. We still have to work hard to maintain world peace. Meg could hear the occasional worried conversation of the customers outside as he cooked in the kitchen. Although Chaos City was a neutral city, if there was a racial war, no power could be absolutely neutral, and they couldn't stay out of the chaos. Father, when can we go out and have fun? Just like when we went to that island last time. I like the feeling of dressing up as someone else. After the lunch service, Amy went up to Meg, who had just taken off his chef's uniform and sat down, looking at him expectantly. Amy, do you want to go on a long-term trip? Meg looked at Amy with a smile. Yes, yes. Amy nodded her little head. Okay, then Father will arrange the time to take you and on a trip, or to another place to open a small restaurant for a while. Meg nodded with a smile. It was rare for the little one to have a holiday, so he should take her out to have fun. There's one more thing. I don't know if Father will agree to it. Amy tapped her index fingers together, a little hesitant. What is it, Meg? Meg asked gently. Amy looked up at Meg, and softly said, I haven't seen my old friends in a long time. Jessica said Teacher Luna prepared a lot of food for them, and they have a place to stay. I want to go and see them. Can you cook something nice for them? Meg looked at the little one's sparkling eyes, and couldn't help but feel a little touched. Although the little one had been busy with magic cultivation and the restaurant recently, she was still that little cutie who cared about her friends. Of course. Then Father will go with you. I'll bring the kitchen utensils and barbecue for the children. Meg nodded with a smile. That's great. Father, I love you. Amy jumped up happily, hugged Meg's neck, and kissed him on the cheek. Then I'll go and get ready. You and can play for a while. Meg smiled and patted Amy's head, then got up and walked to the kitchen. Half an hour later, Meg carried 2 grills, an ice cream maker, and a box full of ingredients, and went out with Amy and Anne. Along the way, Amy chattered and told about her life on the streets. However, that sad experience was full of fun and adventure from her mouth, as if all the dangers and difficulties were insignificant interludes, not even as important as a biscuit. And listened quietly, sometimes smiling, sometimes worried, and sometimes touched Amy's head with pity. Although she still couldn't speak, she could completely understand the common language. We're here. The carriage stopped, and the coachman's voice sounded from outside. Meg lifted the curtain and walked out. Looking at the brand-new greenhouse and the picturesque walls in front of him, a smile appeared on his face. This orphanage was like a kindergarten. The bright but not dazzling colors, the buildings, and the childish murals all made people feel the thriving vitality. It was obvious that Luna had put in a lot of effort to give the children a new home. No pop-up window. Chapter 1985. This orphanage was built by Luna's foundation in the northern part of the city for the children living on the streets. It was a very large 2-story building with more than 500 children in it. The walls encircled a large courtyard of 500 square meters, and there were some simple entertainment facilities in the courtyard. There were also more than a dozen staff members in charge of the children's daily needs. Luna had told him about this before. Solving the problem of the children's survival was more important than letting them go to school. As for the children whose parents were still alive, the foundation also helped them. The city lord's mansion provided them with a batch of unoccupied houses as low-rent housing, which was almost free for them to stay in. They also actively solved the employment problem for the adults so that they could at least survive. Thank you, Master. Meg gave 2 silver coins to the coachman who helped to unload the goods, and the extra silver coin was a tip. Thank you. The coachman was a little flattered as he accepted the silver coins and hurriedly thanked him. Normally, he wouldn't be able to earn so much money in a day, and he only left after helping to carry the goods into the orphanage. Amy, you're here. A small figure ran over. It was Jessica. Yes, I brought father over to make delicious barbecue for everyone. Amy nodded. Hello, Uncle Meg. Jessica looked at Meg and greeted him. Jessica, did you make an appointment with Amy to come over to play today? Meg said with a smile. Jessica nodded. Yes, I haven't seen my friends for a while. Sister Anne. Jessica went up and hugged Anne again. After playing together for a day, they had become good friends. The children who were playing in the courtyard stopped and looked timidly at Meg and the others standing at the door. When they saw Amy and Anne, there was surprise and envy in their eyes. It's Amy. I haven't seen her in a long time. Yes, her little dress is so pretty. She's become prettier too. I remember that uncle. He's Amy's father. He brought us delicious food last time. Then, is he sending us delicious food again this time? The children discussed in hushed voices as their gazes fell on the grill and a large box. Many of the children who had tasted Meg's braised chicken couldn't help but salivate. Xiaomi, you guys go play with the children first. I'll go talk to the staff first, Meg said with a smile as he looked at the two staff members who were walking towards him. Okay. Amy nodded obediently and held Anne's hand as they walked toward the children. Hello, who are you? The staff member stepped forward and looked at Meg warily as he asked. He sized up the oven and big box beside him. Hello, I'm Meg, the owner of Mamie's. I took the liberty of coming here today to make some food for the children, Meg said with a smile. We provide 3 meals for the children here, and the children have already had their lunch. Thank you for your kindness, but this is not in accordance with the rules of the Welfare Institute. Please leave. The middle-aged female staff member refused with a firm expression, without any intention of negotiating. Meg wasn't angry upon hearing this. This meant that the rules of the orphanage were very well enforced, and the staff members were very responsible. Mamie's? Could it be that Mamie's from the Aiden Square? The young staff member looked at Meg with a surprised expression. Yes. Meg nodded. The young staff member whispered a few words into the middle-aged staff member's ear. He then looked at Meg with a smile and said, Please wait for a moment, I'll go get the president. We can't make the decision on this matter. All right. Meg nodded and looked on as the young staff member left. The middle-aged staff member looked at Amy and Anne, who were already playing with the children, and a smile appeared on his face. He turned to Meg and asked, Are those your children? Yes, both of them. Meg nodded with a smile. What a kind child, the staff member praised from the bottom of his heart. From the clothes and temperament of Meg and the 2 children, it could be seen that they were rich. During this period of time, kind-hearted people often came to visit the children, but there was a clear gap between the children of the rich and the children in the orphanage, and it was very difficult for them to play together. Meg smiled as he looked at Amy, who was playing with the children. Who knew that she used to be one of them? He would never allow something like this to happen again. Hello, Mr. Mag. I am the director of the orphanage, Anne Lin. Teacher Luna often mentions you to me. At this moment, a capable middle-aged man walked quickly to Mag and excitedly said, Hello, Mr. Mag. I am Anne Lin, the director of the orphanage. Teacher Luna often mentions you to me. Hello, Director. I came over with the children today to make some snacks for the children and play with them for a while. I wonder if that's possible. Meg also smiled at Anne Lin. Anne Lin nodded with a smile and said, Of course. You are an important investor of the foundation. You have made a very important contribution for the children to be able to stay here. Furthermore, the children should also be very eager to try the culinary skills of the best chef in Chaos City. You flatter me. I just did something that was within my ability. Meg quickly shook his head. It seemed like Luna had made a good impression on him outside. When the middle-aged staff member heard Anneline's words, the way he looked at Meg changed a little. Anneline came to the middle of the yard, and loudly said with a smile, "Children, this is Mr. Meg. He is a very capable chef. He is going to cook for everyone later. Are you happy?" "Really?" "Yes. I've eaten the food cooked by this uncle. It's super delicious." The children immediately nodded happily. Some of the children who had eaten the food cooked by Meg before were even more excited. "Everyone, have fun first. I'll call everyone over when it's ready," Meg also said with a smile. He set up the 2 barbecue racks, and then set up the ice cream machine. "Let us help too. If there's anything we can help with, just let us know." The middle-aged staff member from before came forward with a few female staff members, and said to Meg, "The ingredients have been prepared in advance, but I'll need your help to distribute the food to the children later," Meg said. "Okay." The staff member withdrew his hand that was reaching for the ingredients. Meg lit up the charcoal fire on the 2 barbecue racks. Considering that the children had just had lunch, the charcoal fire burned slowly for half an hour. Then, he opened the safety food box, took out 2 large handfuls of beef kebabs and mutton kebabs, put them on the barbecue rack, and then started to roast them skillfully. There were hundreds of meat kebabs, and each hand held a large handful. However, in Meg's hands, they were flipped up and down. When they were scattered, it was like a fairy scattering flowers. The sparks on the barbecue rack blossomed in an amazing arc. Wow! Amazing! The children and staff present were a little stunned. Such exquisite craftsmanship was like a gorgeous performance. With the heat, the mutton kebabs and beef kebabs began to emit oil, and the fragrance also spread. When the sauce was brushed, the whole place was filled with the sound of saliva swallowing. Chapter 1986. The aroma of barbecued meat wafted through the air, wafting through the courtyard on this winter day. The rich aroma of meat mixed with the aroma of spices was irresistible. Gulp gulp, the children stopped playing and gathered around Meg. They couldn't help but salivate at the sight of the sizzling barbecue skewers in his hands. "This is way too fragrant. Why is the aroma of the meat so alluring? It's different from all the meat I've ever eaten. Even though I ate 3 bowls of rice at noon, I feel like I can eat again now." The children were completely immersed in the aroma of the barbecued meat. As expected of the legendary Mr. Mac. Just the aroma alone is irresistible. Anneline wiped the tears from the corners of her mouth and sighed with emotion. The expressions of the workers weren't any better than the children's. Several of the little girls were already looking at Meg with stars in their eyes. This young and handsome boss also had amazing culinary skills. He was simply too outstanding. "I knew everyone would like it," Amy whispered with a smile on her face. "No one can refuse Uncle Meg's cooking." Jessica nodded in agreement. Meg walked between the 2 grills. A lamb kebab and a beef kebab were almost finished at the same time. They were placed on 2 long metal plates. "Please distribute them to the children. Each child will get a beef kebab and a lamb kebab." Meg looked at the workers standing nearby with a smile. "All right." The middle-aged woman nodded and yelled, "Children, line up, just like when you're eating. Come up one by one to get your skewers." The children, who had been huddled together, immediately lined up into 6 lines. The workers began to distribute the barbecued meat skewers to the children. Meg smiled and continued to barbecue for the children. He left the distribution to the workers so that he could cook better. Oh! This beef kebab is so delicious. This is the first time I've eaten beef kebab. It's so delicious. Ah! I bit my tongue. It's so delicious. Lamb is so cute. It's even more delicious when barbecued. I'm going to cry. It's so delicious. The children had already fallen in love with the barbecued meat. The orphanage allowed them to fill their stomachs for 3 meals, and they were often able to eat meat that they didn't even dare to imagine before. However, the children had never eaten such delicious food. The delicious barbecued meat subverted all their imaginations of food. Even in their dreams, such delicacies had never appeared. Innocent smiles on the children's faces. It was a happiness that was rarely seen on their faces. At least they're happy at this moment. As the person in charge of this orphanage, he had some understanding of every child. The children of the children of the children of's, SSSSSS, and theirs, like a hedgehog. The world, they guarded theirs. Calm. The children. 2. TT. More than 500 children quickly ate the freshly baked beef kebabs and mutton kebabs. The meat on the skewers was not small. Although there were only 2 skewers, it was still a lot for the children. Although they were not satisfied, the children's smiles were quite satisfied. Meg gave the last skewers to the staff as a way of thanking them for their help. After several rejections, the staff still accepted Meg's kindness. Skewers of barbecued meat were distributed from their hands. Listening to the children's praises, they were already overflowing with saliva. But when they really ate the freshly baked barbecued meat, all their thoughts were satisfied. The translucent fat meat was inlaid on the beef like small crystals. The sauce was brushed very fine and evenly. The surface of the barbecued meat was faintly oily, looking very delicate. When the beef entered their mouths, the slightly charred skin and the garlic-scented sauce melted in their mouths first. The garlic, which usually felt pungent, was particularly soft and delicious at this moment, making them salivate. Chewing carefully, the fresh beef immediately collapsed in their mouths. The aroma of garlic and meat wafted out from the meat, and the delicious taste bloomed in their mouths instantly. They could feel their taste buds cheering with every bite, making them unable to stop. This is a crime. It's too delicious. Emlyn sniffed, her emotions a little out of control. Mr. Meg. At this moment, a surprised voice sounded from behind Meg. Meg turned around and saw Luna and Vivian walking in from the door. He smiled and said, "Teacher Luna, Miss Vivian." "Teacher Luna." Amy trotted forward and looked up at Luna. "Little Amy." Luna smiled and stroked Amy's hair. She looked at the unfinished barbecued meat skewers in the children's hands and the 2 grills in front of Meg. Then she looked at Meg and said, "Looks like you made delicious barbecued meat skewers for the children." TSK, it's a pity that we came late and didn't even get to eat a single skewer," Vivian said regretfully as she glanced at the empty ingredients box. "Teacher Luna, this uncle's barbecued meat skewers are super delicious." Yes, it's really delicious." When the children saw Luna, happy smiles appeared on their faces, and they didn't forget to praise Meg. "Amy said she wanted to see her friends, so I brought her here and made some barbecued meat skewers for the children." Meg nodded and took an ice cream from the ice cream machine beside him and handed it to Vivian. "The barbecued meat skewers have just been distributed, but there's still some ice cream." "Thank you, Mr. Mack." Vivian was as happy as a child. She reached out to take the ice cream from Meg's hand and licked it, and her smile became even more radiant. Meanwhile, the children's gazes fell on Vivian's ice cream, and they began to wonder what this beautiful big sister was licking so happily. The children haven't been so happy in a long time. Mr. Meg's culinary skills are really amazing. Aneurin walked over and looked at Meg with admiration. You flatter me. Meg felt that his gaze was a little gay, and he subconsciously leaned toward Luna. He continued, I didn't prepare a lot of barbecued meat skewers, but I also prepared ice cream for the children. Since everyone is here now, let's distribute the ice cream to the children first. Okay, we'll help too. Luna nodded. Meg switched on the ice cream machine, and began to distribute the ice cream to the children after choosing any of the 4 flavors. Chapter 1987. Vivian stood beside Luna, and looked at Meg, who was cleaning up the grill, as she whispered, Mr. Mac really is a good man. Are you sure you don't want to work harder to get your hands on him? Shoo, don't spout nonsense. Luna blushed as she glared at Vivian. Look at how caring he is, and he's so supportive of your work. He's so nice to the children, and he's not as clingy as those young kids. He's perfect for your criteria. Vivian was still unwilling to give up. Luna looked at the children who were happily eating ice cream. She rarely saw such innocent smiles on their faces, and all of this was brought to them by Mr. Meg. Furthermore, if it weren't for Mr. Meg's support, these children would still be homeless on the streets. Luna made her way over to Meg, and said in a gentle voice, Thank you, Mr. Meg. I'm just doing a small favor for the children. Meg set down the things he was cooking, and looked at Luna with a smile as he shook his head. He paused momentarily before continuing, the situation has been a little chaotic recently. Are you going back to Rodu, Teacher Luna? Luna shook her head. No, I have to be present for many of the Foundation's matters. I'll be more useful in Chaos City than in Rodu. Her parents had already written her many letters to urge her to return to Rodu, and they had even sent her brother to come to Rodu to take her back, but she had already decided to stay. War wasn't something that she could decide. Perhaps it would be safer for her to return to Rodu, but if she were to leave, many of the Foundation's projects would be suspended. Hope School was under construction, and the recruitment of teachers was also progressing rapidly. A batch of retired teachers had been hired, and the recruitment of new teachers was progressing at a much faster pace. At the same time, she and the City Lord's castle were also checking the enrollment status of the children of suitable age, so that those who couldn't study in Chaos School could enroll in Hope School. If she were to return to Rodu, she would just be a young mistress with nothing to do at home, but in Chaos City, she carried the hopes of many children on her shoulders. If there's anything you need help with, just let me know. I'll do my best to help. Meg nodded. As the young mistress of the Roth Empire, she had come to Chaos City to do poverty alleviation education. She had chosen to stay in such a turbulent time. Her spirit was admirable. All right. Luna smiled. For some reason, when these words came from Mr. Meg's mouth, she felt at ease and wanted to rely on him. After that, Luna chatted with Mag about Hope School for a while. Meg could feel that Luna had invested a lot of effort and hope in this school. Compared to Chaos School, which could barely enroll a few hundred students, Hope School was the real solution to solve the problem of children at the bottom of the social ladder. Mr. Mac, I've become a teacher at Hope School. You can call me Teacher Vivian from now on, Vivian said to Meg as she stepped forward. Congratulations, Teacher Vivian. Meg smiled. He knew that Vivian was going to become a teacher at Chaos School, but he didn't expect her to go there instead. Thank you. I'll go and have a grilled fish tonight to celebrate. Vivian had a smug smile on her face. She had just received the acceptance notice from Luna, and it had been interviewed by the old teachers. It had nothing to do with Luna at all. The children were having fun, and Meg wasn't in a hurry to call them home. However, he was a little bored at the orphanage, so he took some time to go to the brewery, which was also located in the north of the city. He had just entered the factory when the roaring of the machines could be heard. Such a huge brewery naturally couldn't be used as Hannah's private workshop. The 100 elves that were transferred from the night elves were already assigned to various posts in the brewery. The elf guard at the entrance knew Mag, so he let him enter the factory directly. We need to make wine scientifically. The idea of making wine based on experience is outdated. Only by making wine according to scientific methods and ensuring the standardization of every step can we ensure that every bottle of wine that leaves the factory has the same excellent quality. This is the so-called quality control. I've already researched 3 sets of brewing recipes for different flavors of rum these few days. Meg heard Hannah's voice from inside the brewery just as he walked to the door of the brewery. Meg slowly retracted his footsteps and listened at the door with a strange expression. He didn't expect Hannah to be so good as a factory manager just by taking a few business management books from him. Meg didn't disturb Hannah's work and walked around the factory. The blueprints of this factory were made by the system, and it was done according to the advanced planning of modern breweries. It was just that the exterior of the building used the popular style of this world, and it had a little of the feel of a European-style winery. "Boss, why are you here?" Not long after, Hannah's voice sounded from behind Meg. She quickly walked up. "I heard they said you were here. Why didn't you come and find me directly?" "I heard that factory manager Hannah was teaching the concept of scientific development. I didn't dare to disturb you, so I just walked around by myself." Meg turned around and smiled at Hannah, who was wearing a blue uniform. I just memorized a few paragraphs from the book, but it seems like the effect is quite good. They look at me differently now." Hannah smiled a little embarrassedly. Meg knew that Hannah had the talent to manage this factory, so he asked, "How is the operation of the machine? When can we start mass-producing it?" "This machine is super easy to use. The output is super stable. I only used a day to understand it. It's so much better than the pile of junk I had before." Hannah didn't hide her love for the new machine. "I have already debugged a few of my and my grandpa's rum recipes. The quality of the finished products brewed by the new machine is better, and it can guarantee the quality. The rate of spoilage is very low. But to be safe, I will continue to debug and experiment these 2 days. As long as the quality of today's rum is stable, then starting tomorrow, we can officially start mass-producing rum and mass-producing rum." "Okay, then I will wait for your good news." Meg nodded. He was very satisfied with Hannah's efficiency. "Boss, wait a moment." Hannah turned around and went into the wine cellar. Not long after, she came out with 2 jars of rum. "This is what I brewed yesterday. Take it back and try it. It is mixed with base liquor. It can be considered as a 3-year-old rum." Hannah handed the jars to Meg and said, "Okay, then I will go back and try it." Meg took the jars. He really wanted to test if the rum brewed by Hannah with the new machine maintained a high standard. But there were many customers who were still thinking about the rum. Meg was also waiting for Hannah to mass produce and give the customers another choice. Speaking of which, his Mau Tai and whiskey hadn't been brewed for the customers to try. "I have to work overtime tonight," Meg thought in his heart. Chapter 1988. Lord Bishop, this is the address of the little girl you're looking for. It's located in the southwest corner of the Aden Square. This restaurant is very popular, so it's very easy to find. A young preacher looked at the white-haired bishop and hesitantly said, "However, this little girl's identity is a little special. She's the disciple of the legendary magic casters Crassus and Julian. I'm already aware of this. Bishop Seeley nodded slightly. I'm here on the Pope's orders. There's no need to be wary of anyone. Furthermore, this little girl is very important to our church. I won't hurt her. All right, then I'll bring you to visit her tonight. That young preacher heaved a sigh of relief, and a relaxed smile appeared on his face. He glanced at the time and said, "Why don't I bring you there now? You can have dinner at Mamie's." "All right." Seeley nodded. As the Archbishop of the Church, Seeley came to Chaos City from Rodu on the Pope's orders. His goal was to find the goddess, and bring her back to the Holy See as soon as possible. Of course, the Pope had already told him about the goddess' special identity before he came. As the disciple of Crassus and Julian, and the youngest champion of the Magic Casters tournament, this goddess was only 4 years old, but had already displayed unimaginable power, and a background that even the Holy See had to be wary of. Both Crassus and Urian were lunatics. The only difference was that Crassus was a member of the Magus Tower, so he had to restrain himself a little. Urian, on the other hand, had always been carefree. It was impossible to use the Holy See to suppress them. However, God had already given his orders. The world was going to be in chaos, and the Holy See needed the goddess to save this world that was going to be overturned at any time. Is God right to place his hopes on a 4-year-old child this time? Although it was a little disrespectful, Seeley couldn't help but think to himself. Kano was the person in charge of the Holy See in Chaos City. He was a young preacher, but he had grown up in the Holy See, and was already a preacher who could hold his own. The Holy See was gradually declining in the Roth Empire, and gradually lost its presence outside the Roth Empire. The Holy See branch in Chaos City actually only had a small church. There were only 3 people from the Holy See, including Kano. They were mainly responsible for the daily prayers and series of work for the small number of believers. Kano had already been in Chaos City for 3 years, and this was the first time he saw someone sent by the Holy See. What was even more unexpected was that the person who came was actually the bishop. One had to know that a bishop's status in the Holy See was only second to the Pope. Even in the Roth Empire, they were extremely respected. However, he was willing to travel all the way from Rodu to Chaos City for a little girl. As a regular who would occasionally go to Mamie's for a sumptuous meal, he had some understanding of the little boss who was the favorite of the group. This made him even more puzzled as to how this little girl was connected to the Pope and the Holy See. However, as an outcast, Kano still wanted to perform better in front of the bishop even though he was doing well in Chaos City. Perhaps he would have a chance to be transferred back to Rodu. "Lord Bishop, this Mamie's is our destination." The restaurant's owner, Mr. Meg. Kano brought Seeley to the entrance of Mamie's. It was already lunchtime, and there was already a long line at the entrance. His identity as a bishop of the Holy See was not very useful here. Luckily, Seeley did not have the disease of a powerhouse. He followed Kano to the back of the line, and listened to him talk about some of the interesting stories and rules of this restaurant. Right at this moment, the restaurant's door was pushed open a crack. A round orange cat squeezed out from the crack, followed by a little half-elf girl with twin ponytails. "It's her." Seeley's eyes lit up instantly. This little girl looked as delicate and lovely as a jade sculpture. She was so small, but she was already emitting a frightening magic aura. The news was right. This little girl's magic aura was already not lower than the 7th tier. A 4-year-old high-level magic caster was an unprecedented existence on the Norland continent. Furthermore, Seeley could also sense a familiar trace of divine power on her. This was the energy unique to the Holy See's unique cultivation system. She is indeed the goddess chosen by the gods. She is indeed extraordinary, Seeley praised softly. Yes. Not only is she cute, but she is also so outstanding. She simply does not give ordinary people a chance to survive. Kano nodded in agreement. Little Amy's hair is tied up so beautifully today, a young and beautiful girl praised. Father tied it up for me. Isn't it beautiful? Amy fiddled with her ponytail. It's really beautiful. I wonder if I can ask Mr. Mac to tie one up for me too. The girl said with a blush. Amy stared at her for a while, and shook her head seriously. Little big sister, you are very beautiful. Don't think too highly of yourself. That girl covered her mouth and giggled. Although she was rejected, she was in a very good mood. Little boss, what about me? Harrison chimed in. You are an adult. You have to be more mature, Amy said as she looked at him. Little boss, you have double standards. Harrison was a little aggrieved. I'm not going to chat with you guys anymore. I have to go for a walk with the cat. Amy kicked Ugly Duckling, who was lying down at the door, lightly, and scolded softly, hurry up and get moving. Run one lap around the Aiden Square before you eat. You are not allowed to eat until you finish running. Oh, equals intersection omega intersection, smiley face oh. Ugly Duckling turned around with a surprised expression. Good food is only good if the fat and lean are evenly distributed. Good duck, hurry up and get moving. I will be watching you from behind. Amy's expression was very serious, and did not take no for an answer. Meow, meow, although Ugly Duckling was unwilling, it still got up and walked into the square under Amy's gaze. It ran quickly, and then jumped onto a tree. It climbed up the treetop in a few steps, and then jumped onto another tree easily. After that, it started to jump between the treetops. It's so cold. The restaurant is still warmer. Amy stood at the door for 3 seconds before she turned around and went back into the restaurant. She closed the door on her way back, leaving the customers looking at each other in bewilderment. Didn't little boss say she was going for a walk with the cat just now? She also told Ugly Duckling that she would watch it, but she only did it for 3 seconds, she's a little two-faced. I like it. The customers laughed as they discussed. This little episode made waiting in line a lot more interesting. The little girl is quite popular, Healy said with a smile. Yes, little boss is very popular with the customers. She is cute, and the way she talks is interesting. Moreover, she would teach some customers who do not follow the rules a lesson from time to time. She has become the guardian angel of Mamis. Kano nodded with a smile. Seems like you know this restaurant quite well. Do you come here often? Healy turned around and looked at Kano. I come here occasionally. Kano looked embarrassed. Mamie's was not a restaurant that he could frequent. Chapter 1989. Kano did come to Mamie's to eat occasionally, but only twice a day. He was busy with the church's work in the morning, so he couldn't come to the restaurant early in the morning to line up, so he could only make do by himself. As a missionary driven by interest, he would have to go home and inherit his family fortune if he didn't become a missionary, so he preferred to live a carefree life. Chaos City was pretty good. He could go home to visit when he missed home, and stay away when he was not. He was carefree, and happy. Everything was good in Chaos City, but to a foodie who was picky with his food in Rodu, the biggest torture here was not being able to eat good food. This was also one of the main reasons why he wavered and hesitated on whether to go home and inherit his family fortune. And Mamie's appearance was like a ray of light in Kano's world, giving him a sufficient reason to stay. Mr. Mac was really too awesome. As a man who had eaten in all the restaurants in Rodu, Kano also believed that Mr. Mac was the most awesome. In his heart, no restaurant could be compared to Mamie's, and no restaurant could let him eat for a few months without getting sick of it. Furthermore, he would receive a new surprise every once in a while. Even a pig would develop feelings after being raised for a long time, let alone a foodie who had been fed for a few months. Hence, when the Holy See sent out the Archbishop and asked specifically for Little Boss, Kano was still a little worried. However, the Holy See was not some evil organization, and the Pope was obviously a kind old man. But for the Archbishop to come all the way to Chaos City to look for Little Boss, it was a little surprising. The Hill didn't show too much interest in Kano's life. This person in charge of the Holy See in Chaos City was very capable, but he was too lazy, and didn't like to manage the Holy See's affairs. Hence, he took the initiative to apply for a transfer to Chaos City. Kano was afraid that the Hill would be bored waiting in line, so he introduced many interesting things about Mamie's to him at the side. The Hill also listened very seriously, especially the parts about Amy, and even raised some questions occasionally. Does this restaurant always have so many customers? After waiting in line for an hour, Healy, who still hadn't had his turn to enter, finally couldn't help but ask. That's right. Amy's is the restaurant with the best business in Chaos City. However, the queue is very fair, and the atmosphere is very good, so the customers are all willing to wait in line. Kano nodded. He glanced at the remaining 3 guests in front of him and said with a smile, "Don't worry, it'll be our turn very soon." While they were talking, a few guests walked out of the restaurant, chatting and laughing. The guests in front of them entered the restaurant. "You can go in now," Kano hurriedly said as he walked into the restaurant with Seely. As soon as they entered the restaurant, the cold was isolated outside the door. There were hundreds of guests sitting in the beautifully decorated hall, but the expected noise did not appear. What surprised Seely even more was the guests sitting together. Elves and demons sat at the same table, humans and orcs sat opposite each other, chatting and laughing. Dwarves and goblins raised their wine glasses and clinked them, looking very harmonious and friendly. If he didn't know clearly what had happened in the history of the Norland continent, he would even think that times had changed. "There are empty seats here, but we need to share a table with those 2 guests." Kano found 2 empty seats by the window. They were left empty after the previous guests left, but there were still 2 burly orcs sitting at the table. "Is it okay?" Seely glanced at those 2 orcs with a slight frown. Kano knew what Seely was worried about. He smiled and said, "It's okay. This is Amy's tradition and rule. All the customers who enter Amy's have to abide by it." Seely naturally had no reason to be afraid of those 2 orcs. He just didn't want to cause a conflict with others in the restaurant and bring trouble to the boss. The 2 of them sat down at the empty seats that had already been cleaned up. That orc who downed a huge mug of beer looked up and burped. He turned his head to look at Seely and Kano, and gave them a friendly smile. Seely nodded slightly, feeling a little uncomfortable. "You 2 are the preachers of the Holy See from the Roth Empire, right?" That orc sitting beside Kano also looked at the 2 of them curiously. Although the Holy See had been trying to expand its influence all these years, it was declining even in the Roth Empire, let alone expand. The fact that there were only 5 staff members in the church in Chaos City was enough to explain everything. "Yes, we are preachers." Kano nodded with a smile. "I heard that the Roth Empire had just launched a sneak attack on us orcs, and massacred many tribes. Is that true?" That orc asked again with obvious hostility in his expression. Seely had already heard about this from the Pope. The Roth Empire had launched an attack on the orcs without a valid reason, and had even massacred many tribes cruelly. It was wrong no matter what, so he hesitated on how to answer this question. What are you talking about? Is this something that these two preacher friends can influence and decide? They probably don't know what exactly happened, just like us. That orc sitting opposite him patted him on the shoulder before smiling at Seely. I'm sorry. This brother of mine is a little hot-tempered, but he doesn't mean any hostility. It's all right. If this matter is really as he said, the Roth Empire and us should be the ones apologizing. Seely shook his head. He was surprised that this orc was so understanding, and also expressed his attitude towards this war. What's so good about war? I think that Roth Empire's king must be out of his mind, that orc mumbled as he finished his beer in one gulp, and kept quiet. What would you like to order? Yabamiya came to Kanua's table with a smile. Miss Mia, we would like a roast goose, a serving of red braised pork, a serving of eggplant with garlic sauce, a serving of mapo tofu, a serving of steamed fish head with diced hot red peppers, and a refill of iced beer for these two gentlemen, Kanua said skillfully. Thank you, little brother, that orc said to Kanua with a smile. You're welcome. Kanua also shook his head with a smile. Seely glanced at Kanua, and was surprised by his skillfulness. However, Seely's gaze was quickly attracted by Amy, who was playing with the cat behind the counter. It's the aura of God, and it's already quite rich. This young lady is indeed not ordinary. Seely observed Amy. The Pope said that he had once given her the wings of God, but she hid the powers of God very well. If it wasn't for the Holy See's higher-ups, they probably wouldn't be able to tell. At such a young age, she could actually resist the urge to summon the wings of God to play with it. This young lady's self-control also surprised him. Not long after, dishes were served on the table and placed in front of Seely and Kanua. Meanwhile, Seely's gaze was also quickly attracted by the delicacies in front of him, and he retracted his gaze from Amy. It smells so good. Seely's nose twitched, and he couldn't help but think in his heart. Chapter 1990. As a highly respected Archbishop of the Holy See, Seely's desire for good food had long faded. Living a pure and simple life had become a habit, but in front of the dishes on the table, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. This thing that had been cut into countless pieces but still maintained the shape of a goose was roast goose. The rich aroma of the braised food made one restless. The large fish head on the plate was covered with red and green chopped peppers. The spicy and fresh aroma had already hit him in the face. Although he was surprised that someone would eat the fish head alone, it didn't affect his impulse to try it. The red meat in the ceramic bowl was pork with fat and lean meat. This kind of meat with more fat was usually too fatty in Seely's eyes, but the chef had used some unknown method to dye this fatty meat with a layer of bright red color. The rich aroma of the meat was so pure that it was irresistible. There was no mapo in the mapo tofu, which made Seely feel relieved. However, there was no fish in the eggplant with garlic sauce, which made him feel a little cheated. Have a taste. These are all very popular dishes from Mamie's. Kano looked at Seely with respect. As a marginal member of the Holy See, there weren't many opportunities to have dinner with an archbishop at the same table. Seely nodded slightly. He picked up a piece of roast goose with his chopsticks and put it into his mouth. Crunch. A slight sound could be heard as the crispy goose skin was bitten. Under the skin was the fresh and tender goose meat soaked in the gravy. With a bite, the gravy splattered in his mouth. His taste buds were instantly activated and began to welcome the delicious feverish storm. Roast goose, steamed fish head with diced hot red peppers, mapo tofu. Seely gradually immersed himself in the delicious food, unable to extricate himself. He almost couldn't imagine that someone could cook such delicious food. This was originally meant to fill the stomach and replenish energy, but it had become a kind of enjoyment. As an experienced person, Kano smiled as he watched Seely eat heartily. This was similar to when he first discovered Mamis. After a long time, the dishes in front of them were all finished. Only then did they let out a burp and stopped eating. I didn't expect to finish it all. Seely looked at the empty plate in front of him and thought in surprise. When these dishes were first served, he was a little worried that it would be a waste if he couldn't finish them. Are you satisfied with the food? Kano looked at Seely a little nervously and asked. Yes, very good. Seely nodded and glanced at the waiters in the restaurant. He was a little surprised. The waiters in this restaurant are a little special. A pure-blooded golden dragon, a pure-blooded frost dragon, a space great magician of an unknown race, an 8th-tier magician of an unknown race, and a 7th-tier elf. It was hard to imagine that this was the strength of a waiter in a restaurant. Yeah, the waitresses at Mamis are all very pretty. Kano nodded in agreement. Healy glanced at Kano. I mean, Mr. Mack has great taste, Kano explained awkwardly. There's still more than an hour before the restaurant closes for business. Why don't we go out for a walk first? Kano suggested to ease his embarrassment. All right. Seely glanced at Meg, who was busy in the kitchen. If he wanted to take Amy away, he had to get Meg's permission first. That way, they could also avoid conflict between Crassus and Julian. An archbishop from the Holy See. What are they here for? In the kitchen, Meg looked up at Kano and Seely, who were about to pay the bill and leave. It was not difficult to determine their identities from their clothes. Ever since he met the Pope in Rodu and Amy was given that pair of invisible wings, Meg had spent a lot of time collecting information related to the Holy See. This white-haired old priest should be Archbishop Seely, the second in command in the Holy See, who was second only to the Pope. With the Archbishop's status, he shouldn't appear in Chaos City, let alone specially line up to eat at Mamis. Could he be here for Amy? Meg frowned. The Holy See had existed among the humans for a very long time. Before the Roth Empire was established, it was even the beacon of light for the humans during the Dark Age. It was the symbol of light and justice. After the Roth Empire was established, the royal family intentionally weakened the Holy See's influence in order to truly control the power, causing the Holy See to decline day by day. However, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. The Holy See still had a strong foundation in the Roth Empire, and even had several 10th-tier powerhouses. From all the information, the Holy See had a very positive image in the history of the humans. However, what Meg could not understand was why the Pope thought that Amy was a goddess chosen by God. The Holy See was the Holy See of the humans, and Amy was a half-elf. This did not make sense. As expected, when the restaurant was closed for the night, Kano brought Seely, and knocked on the restaurant's door. Mr. Meg, I am Archbishop Seely of the Holy See. I have something to discuss with you about your daughter, Amy. I wonder if it's possible, Seely said to Meg. Meg looked at Seely. After pondering for a while, he still opened the door, and said, Come in. Father, who are they? Amy was about to go upstairs with Ugly Duckling in her arms when she saw Seely and Kano come in, and asked curiously. They have something to discuss with Father. Meg, you and can go upstairs first, said Meg. All right. Amy nodded, and went upstairs with Anne. What an obedient child, Seely praised as he watched Amy go upstairs. Meg poured 2 glasses of water for the two of them, and sat down opposite them. He calmly asked, May I know what brings you here today, Archbishop? Seely looked into Meg's eyes, and said, I know Mr. Meg has already met the Pope in Rodu. I came to Chaos City on the Pope's orders to bring the goddess to Rodu to receive the Holy See's conferment and baptism. Meg frowned upon hearing that. There's no goddess here. Seems like the two of you have come to the wrong place. Mr. Meg's daughter, Amy, has received the wings of God. She was chosen by God, and is also the goddess of the Holy See. Returning to the Holy See is the best choice for her. She will become the next pope, Seely said solemnly. Meg looked at her with a mocking smile, and said, You think it's true just because you say so. Then I'll say that your pope was chosen by the god of cookery, and is my Mamie's holy son. Tell him to come and serve in my restaurant. Do a good job, and he will become the next manager. You. Seely's expression turned cold. Mr. Mac. Kano, who had been standing at the side, looked at Meg with a worried expression. This Mr. Mac was too fierce. He dared to say anything. If there's nothing else, I'll see you out. Meg stood up, and looked at Seely and Kano without any reservation. Chapter 1991. Meg didn't care who that bullshit god was. He only knew that anyone who tried to take Amy away from him was not a good person. Moreover, he had never been very fond of frauds. Previously in Rodu, it was fine that Amy liked those wings, but if the Holy See wanted to use those things as a threat to make Amy go to Rodu to become some goddess, he wouldn't agree. As for the so-called Pope, Meg didn't believe that Andre would let a half-elf become the Pope and make the Roth Empire's royal family kneel at her feet for generations to ascend to the throne. Mr. Meg, we don't mean any harm. This is the Pope's handwritten letter for you. Seely also stood up, took out a letter from his spatial ring, and handed it to Meg. Meg didn't take the letter, and looked at Seely calmly as he said, I've said before that Amy is not some goddess. She's just a 4-year-old child. I hope she can grow up happily. There are no plans related to becoming the Pope here. The atmosphere in the restaurant suddenly became a little tense. Kano's gaze shifted between the two of them. He was secretly impressed that Mr. Mac, as a normal person, actually had the strong aura to go toe-to-toe with the Archbishop. At the same time, he was a little worried that the Archbishop wouldn't be able to control himself and go on a rampage. Seely looked at Meg in silence for a long time. He placed the letter in his hand on the table, and said in a low voice, I shouldn't have told you this, but you're so stubborn. This world isn't as peaceful and stable as you see it. The devil has already climbed out of the abyss, and darkness is about to descend. This world needs light, and she is the one who can bring light to this world. God has chosen her, so she has to shoulder this responsibility. Ha! Meg laughed unkindly. If this world needs saving, let your so-called gods save the world themselves. If your so-called gods only know how to hide behind and blabber, then let your so-called representatives of gods do it. Don't you think it's embarrassing and ridiculous to let a 4-year-old child save the world and put this kind of responsibility on her shoulders? Meg's smile didn't hide the mockery. Hearing that, Kano blushed and turned his face away. He didn't know why Seely came to Meg and Little Boss today. Although Little Boss was very powerful and talented, as Mr. Mac had said, it was still hard to believe that a 4-year-old child would take on the responsibility of saving the world, even if the gods had chosen her. Healy was silent. Surprisingly, he was not angry. You are a good father, and I can understand your anger. However, this matter concerns the Norland continent, so I hope you can consider it carefully. Seely turned and walked toward the door after saying that. Kano nodded apologetically at Meg before turning around and quickly catching up with Seely. There's no need to consider. Amy won't go with you. Meg looked at Seely's departing figure and calmly said, if the Norland continent has to be saved by a child, then it's over. Seely's footsteps paused for a moment, and he reached out to push the door open and walked out. Kano followed him out, and closed the door carefully again. He followed behind Seely. Although he was only a mid-tier magic caster, he could also feel Seely's anger and the unstable magic elements around him. Kano didn't expect Mr. Mac, a normal person, to have such courage in front of a great magic caster. He even rejected the opportunity to let his daughter become the future Pope of the Holy See without hesitation. Mr. Mac has always been known to dote on his daughter. Maybe he just doesn't want Amy to leave him. Kano said softly. Foolish, ignorant. Seely uttered these two words in a dull voice. Archbishop, what do you plan to do now? Kano asked carefully. He was a little worried that Seely would snatch the child away. After all, this was Chaos City, and Julian lived not far away from them. I will stay in Chaos City for a while. The Divine Lady's matter is very important. We have to bring her back to the Holy See, Seely said seriously. All right. Kano nodded. He didn't ask any more questions that shouldn't be asked at his level. Meg casually threw the letter written by the Pope into the rubbish bin. No matter what that fellow said, he couldn't send Amy to the Holy See. The Holy See might pour a lot of resources into Amy, but Amy might also become an emotionless oracle because of that. That was something he couldn't accept. Furthermore, he was already a demigod now. He was only one step away from becoming a god. The so-called gods had already lost their mystery and unattainable feeling in his eyes. If anyone dared to have designs on Amy, he would kill them even if they were a god. Meg kept the 2 cups, and was about to go and study how to brew wine when the bell rang outside the door again. Again. Meg frowned. He opened the door, and it wasn't Seely or Kano standing outside the door. It was Elizabeth, who was wearing a frosty dress. Elizabeth. Did you leave something in the restaurant? Meg looked at her, a little surprised. No, I'm here to resign and say goodbye, Elizabeth said coldly as she looked at Meg. Resign? Yes. Thank you for taking care of me during this period. I'm leaving Chaos City to look for my father. Elizabeth nodded. Meg looked at Elizabeth. He saved her from the Dragon Island. It was an accident that she started working at the restaurant, but after spending this period of time together, eating and working together every day, they definitely had some feelings for each other. Furthermore, it was still uncertain whether Rankster was still alive. He had disappeared in the place where the Great Old One was sealed, so the chances of him still being alive were not high. However, after spending this period of time together, he had some understanding of Elizabeth's character. She wouldn't change her mind easily once she had decided on something, let alone something that she had been obsessed with all this while. Have you told Mia and the rest? Meg asked. I left a letter for Mia, and nothing else. Elizabeth shook her head. I'm not good at saying goodbye. You don't have to resign. Amy's door will always be open for you. You can come back whenever you want. Everyone will miss you, Meg said to her with a smile. Elizabeth looked at Meg. That warm smile reminded her of her father again. She nodded slightly, and turned to leave. Wait a minute, Meg called out to her. He took out a silver ring from his pocket, and went forward to pass it to her. This is. Meg smiled, and said, I didn't prepare any gift. This ring was made by Amy and me a few days ago. It might not be very beautiful, but it's a little token of my appreciation. I hope you'll think of us when you see the ring. Thank you. Elizabeth put the ring on her ring finger. Then, she looked at Meg and said goodbye. She turned and walked away. A huge snowflake appeared under her feet, and she had already disappeared from the square that was shrouded in the night. System, are you sure that thing can locate the location successfully? What if it runs out of battery? Meg muttered in his heart. Host, please don't doubt the system's professionalism. It still has the basic solar charging function. This ring not only has the function of locating and tracking, but also has the function of alerting low health danger. If it weren't for the fact that the network hasn't been built yet, it would have all the functions of the little genius watch. The system's proud voice sounded. Chapter 1992. Meg wasn't a perverted stalker. The world was too chaotic, and he was just worried that it would be too dangerous for Elizabeth to be alone outside. If she were to disappear one day like her father, he wouldn't know where to find her. This ring had a positioning function, as well as a crisis alert function. The former was to locate Elizabeth when he needed to find her, while the latter was to alert him in time if Elizabeth was in danger, and he might be able to save her life. Elizabeth is gone, and the Holy See is here. Should I also close my business and bring Amy out to play for a while? Meg thought to himself as he turned to enter the restaurant. Just as Mag was about to close the door, a sharp whistle sounded, and a letter flew over from afar. It flew in through the gap in the door, and Mag caught it. Meg took a look at the grey temple seal on it, closed the door, and opened the letter. After a while, Meg put down the letter that the Grey Temple had sent overnight, and his expression changed slightly. What's wrong? Did something happen? A golden light flashed in the restaurant, and Irina, who had just returned, looked at Meg, who had a grave expression, and asked him. It's from the Grey Temple. The homes of a few ministers of the Ministry of War in Rodu were massacred, and then burned. Meg passed the letter in his hand to Irina. Irina skimmed through it and looked up at Meg. Is it the orc's revenge? Or is Josh stirring up trouble again? Oster's house was almost robbed this time, so he shouldn't have the guts to go to Rodu to commit murder and arson. It said that the pro-war faction among the orcs is decreasing rapidly, and more people are joining Connie's peace faction. They can't even take care of themselves, and can't continue to intensify the conflict at this time. Meg said with a grave expression, and to blow things up at this time, either Andre is looking for a legitimate reason to start a war, or Josh is deliberately stirring it up. Irina put down the secret letter, and shook her head. The joint statement from the Dragons and the Peace Alliance should have been sent to Rhoda by now. I don't think Andre will continue to stir up a war at the risk of being attacked by all the other races. This is not something the Roth Empire can afford. Seems like we have to make a trip to Rodu. I plan to close the restaurant for a month, and bring Amy and Anne to Rodu to look for Josh, Meg said to Irina. In that case, can I be the lady boss again? Irina looked at Mag with a smile. The kind that manages the money. If you're willing, I don't mind opening a tavern in Rodu. Mag nodded with a smile. It's not good to hide every day with a child. It's better to have a legitimate identity. I think it's okay. All right, then we'll set off tomorrow. I'll pack up and prepare. Meg nodded. He already had a rough plan for the trip to Rodu in his mind. Ding. An unexpected incident has triggered a hidden mission, open a famous tavern. Host, please open a tavern in Rodu that is renowned among the drinkers and become the most renowned tavern in Rodu. Mission prerequisite reward, a secret recipe for drunkard's peanut and a recipe for pig's ear salad have been released. As the mission progresses, more mission rewards will be released. Congratulations, host, for taking the first step in expanding the restaurant. Right at this moment, the system's voice suddenly appeared in Meg's mind. Looking at the two shiny recipe experience bags in his mind, Meg was slightly stunned. System, you've changed. You've actually learned to give mission rewards in advance. Very good, keep it up. Drunkard's peanut and pig's ear salad were two divine dishes that went well with alcohol. They were a perfect match for a tavern. In a tavern, selling alcohol was naturally the most important thing. Meg didn't intend to open another Mamie's. He wanted to focus on alcohol so that customers would fall in love with the tavern because of the alcohol, and not because of the dishes. 2 dishes were too few. No, it was enough. Oh, yes, help me analyze the situation. In the past 2 days, there have been demonstrations and burning of slave contracts in the Wind Forest, but Helena acted out of character and didn't stop these movements. What do you think she's thinking? Irina asked Meg. Meg pondered for a moment and said, there are 2 possibilities. 1, Helena has realized that her policies and direction are wrong, and intends to turn over a new leaf and become a good person from now on, gradually reversing her policies. The second possibility is that Helena is deliberately relaxing her policies and letting all the rebellions be completely exposed. Then, she will launch a thunderous attack and completely eliminate the voices of opposition. Helena is obviously not someone who can change after realizing her mistakes. I understand this old woman's stubbornness very well. She will never admit that she is wrong. Irina shook her head and frowned slightly. Then, she will most likely start to settle scores with those who participated in this movement after the popularity of this movement dies down. What she does is actually not important. What's important is what the night elves are doing. In this turbulent time, when most of the elves are starting to side with the night elves emotionally, the most important thing is to let the night elves expand quickly and even take the opportunity to overturn Helena's ruling system, Meg said. Irina was deep in thought. She turned and walked towards the stairs as she said, I'm going to write a letter. Meg wasn't in a hurry to go upstairs. He also had a lot of things to do tonight. Mamie's was closed for a month. This was unprecedented since the opening of the restaurant. The customers would definitely be furious. He also had to consider how to arrange for the employees' leave. Reina's Mana Hot Pot restaurant had become the favorite of many hot pot lovers. It could replace the customers' needs for hot pot. Mia's ice cream shop had become another children's playground. Now that Mamie's was closed, the ice cream shop could operate all day. Meg planned to give the employees a long holiday during the closure period. Of course, if they had nowhere to go, they could stay at the ice cream shop or Mana Hot Pot restaurant to help out. The restaurant was closed, but it couldn't be completely sealed. After all, this was the only teleportation portal that connected the Moon Nation to the Norland continent. Meg planned to give Barbara and Yabamiya a bunch of keys each. Firstly, it would be convenient for the people from the Moon Nation to come and go. Secondly, they could enter the restaurant if there was an emergency. Mamie's now had a 9th-tier defense ability. Normal attacks wouldn't be a threat to the people in the restaurant at all. Meg took out the bulletin board from behind the counter, and wrote a closure notice. The reason was very legitimate. Children are on holiday. Bring the children out to play and collect materials. Return in a month. After that, Meg took a photo stone and went into the kitchen. The next morning, before the customers came to line up, Meg hung the bulletin board on the door. After that, Meg hung a huge screen at the door and started to play cooking tutorials. Chapter 1993. Meg wasn't in a hurry to leave. Instead, he made a scrumptious breakfast, and only announced the 1-month closure when everyone had arrived. Of course, everyone had already seen the news before they entered the restaurant. Boss, is the ice cream shop still open? Yabamiya's eyes were a little red. Clearly, she didn't sleep well after receiving Elizabeth's letter last night. The 1-month closure is also a 1-month holiday for everyone. Everyone can go home or go out to play. It's up to you, Mia, to decide whether the ice cream shop will be open or not, Meg said with a smile. Then, I'll go home for a month. Coincidentally, I have something to settle at home. Camilla stretched lazily. When she thought about how she didn't have to wake up early every day to chop vegetables, and could finally sleep in for a period of time, she felt very happy. I've been busy saving the world recently. It's good that I don't have to run around. Barbara nodded. The City Lord's castle had been looking for her to discuss spell formations recently. As the Moon Nation's #1 contact, she was also worried sick about this world. Jane hesitated for a while, but still didn't say anything. Then, I'll keep the ice cream shop open. The children like it. Those sisters who are not busy can come and help out in the shop, Yabamiya said with a smile. She looked at Jane and said, Jane, come and help out in the ice cream shop. Jane nodded with a smile. Anna and I can help out in the ice cream shop too, Shirley said. Me too. Gina raised her hand with a gentle smile. The children seem to like me. I'll go over when I'm free, Angela said with a smile. She had already made a plan in the past month. Her research had already ended, and she had to start interacting with the succubi in Chaos City officially. What about me? Hannah asked as she chewed on a deep-fried dough stick. I'll give you a month. When I come back, I hope the brewery's rum will be ready for sale, Meg said to her with a smile. I'm talking about eating. Hannah stopped chewing the deep-fried dough stick and blinked. Deal with it yourself. Meg took out a purse and pushed it in front of Hannah. Sigh. It's so hard not to eat soy milk and youtiao for a month. Hannah sighed and continued to chew on the youtiao. By the way, where's big sister Elizabeth? Phyllis asked as she looked around. Yeah, I haven't seen her since the beginning, Gina asked. Elizabeth has started her vacation ahead of time, Meg said with a smile. It seems that she has received advance notice, Camilla said. Everyone was deep in thought. They thought that Elizabeth was taking an early leave because she had something to do, so they didn't ask any more questions. Yabamiya looked at Meg in surprise. After breakfast, everyone said their goodbyes and left. Meg gave the keys to the restaurant to Barbara and Mia. Goodbye, big sisters. I'll miss you. Amy stood at the door and waved goodbye to everyone. Boss, did she say goodbye to you before she left? Yabamiya stayed until the end and asked Meg. Yes, she came to resign, but I didn't agree. I left a spot open for her. She can come back anytime. Meg nodded and patted Yabamiya's head. He smiled and said, Don't worry. She's just going to relax. People like her won't stay in one place forever. She belongs to the outside world. Yeah. Yabamiya's conflicted expression eased a lot. She smiled energetically again. She said she'll come back to visit us often. Meg smiled and said, That's right. You can manage the ice cream shop. Don't tire yourself out. Take a day off every week. Give yourself and your sisters a break. Don't worry, boss. I'll be sure to do a good job. Yabamiya nodded with a serious expression. Goodbye, Amy, Anne. Yabamiya hugged Amy and before departing. So, father, where are we going next? Amy closed the door and looked at Meg with anticipation in her eyes. Anne's expression was also filled with anticipation. She had heard many interesting stories from Amy about their last vacation and the opening of a new restaurant. We're going to Rhoda this time. Go upstairs and pack up the things that you want to take with you. After that, we'll be ready to set off, Meg said with a smile. That's great. Rodu is so fun. I went there twice, but I still didn't get to enjoy myself. Amy was elated. She then turned and went upstairs to pack her things. And stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window for a while before turning to Meg and gesturing outside. Don't worry, Anne. The customers might not be used to it at first, but they'll find a place to eat when they're hungry. Meg made his way over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the customers who were shaking their heads and sighing as they read the notices outside. He smiled as he consoled Anne. He was still feeling a little guilty. He could completely understand the discomfort of the customers who had suddenly run out of food. However, this had happened too suddenly. In order to ensure that the customers would have a long life to eat, this trip to Rodu was unavoidable. If Josh really was in Rodu and was trying to escalate the situation and incite a large-scale war among species, then he had to stop him and kill him. Anne nodded with a thoughtful expression. Irina made her way downstairs and asked Meg, "Are we setting off now?" Meg nodded and said, "Yes. We'll have to find a venue when we get to Rodu. If everything goes well, we'll be able to complete all the preparations by today." Meow, Ugly Duckling, who was sleeping on the counter, got up and stretched. It then rolled over and lay down on the counter again, revealing its round belly and snoring comfortably. Ugly Duckling, are you going to leave a duck in the restaurant? Amy asked Ugly Duckling, who was still sleeping on the counter, as she came down from upstairs. Meow. Ugly Duckling jumped up, but it missed its footing and was about to fall to the ground with a thud. Fortunately, Amy had quick reflexes and kicked it into the wall, successfully preventing it from falling to the ground. Ugly Duckling got up from the ground and shook its head as it called out to Amy, "Thank you so much." "You're welcome." Amy reached out and patted the cat's head. "Let's go. Come, I'll take you guys flying." Irina waved at the three of them. Golden light flashed beneath their feet, and the three of them disappeared from the restaurant. Not long after, a purple-striped griffin took off from the north of the city and flew out of the city. It picked up the four of them on a mountain outside the city, and continued north toward Rodu. Chapter 1994. Mr. Meg should be closed for business by now, right? I don't know if I'll disturb him if I go over now. Gloria thought to herself as she closed her eyes to rest in the carriage. Her beautiful face couldn't hide the tiredness she was feeling. A few days ago, Jeffrey officially announced that she was the sole heir of family Moreton and delegated her power to take over the family's affairs. Moreover, Jeffrey personally trained her and gave her all kinds of support so that she could quickly establish her authority in the family business. However, for a newbie who had just started to learn about business management in recent months, even though she tried very hard to digest all the information, she still felt like she wasn't strong enough. She didn't sleep last night and took care of some business this morning. She planned to go to Mamie's to chat with Mr. Meg for a while. Even if it was just a cup of tea with him, it might be able to calm her down a little. "Miss, we've arrived at Mamie's." The carriage stopped and the coachman's voice came from outside. "Okay." Gloria stood up and got off the carriage. "A month's leave." 3 minutes later, Gloria stood in front of the restaurant and looked at the notice hanging on the door. She was a little surprised and disappointed. Mamie Restaurant closed its doors without any warning, and it was closed for an entire month. Gloria was inexplicably disappointed. It was like a very important person had suddenly left and didn't even say goodbye to her. After standing in front of the restaurant in silence for a long time, Gloria sat on the bench outside the restaurant for a long time. About half an hour later, Gloria suddenly stood up and turned to look at Mamie's sign that was shining brightly under the sun. She had a bright smile on her face. "Mr. Meg said that life is our own. Only we can control and make decisions. Since I've chosen this path, then I'll walk it without hesitation. Gloria turned and walked to the carriage. She had regained her calm and confidence, and the tiredness on her face was gone. To the suede factory. Gloria got on the carriage and ordered. Sigh, what's going on? Why is there a war in such a peaceful world? Abraham stood beside the carriage and sighed as he looked at the servants who were moving various items onto the flying mounts. A horse galloped over from afar. He's here. Abraham's eyes lit up, and he looked on with anticipation as the knight approached him from the distance. Abraham looked at the empty-handed knight and frowned. Where's the breakfast? My Lord Duke, Mamie's has closed for the day. The notice hanging on the door says that the children are on vacation, so they need to go out to play and collect materials. They will be closed for a month, the knight said nervously. There's such a thing. Abraham's eyes widened upon hearing this. He didn't think that his last breakfast after leaving Chaos City would be gone. However, Mr. Mac dotes on Little Boss the most, so there's nothing wrong with taking the children out to play during the holidays. It's just that those customers who are already addicted to Mamie's have to suffer. Abraham sighed, but he couldn't hide the smile on his face. Hee, if I can't eat it, then you can't eat it either. My mood is much better now that I think about it. Abraham climbed onto the carriage and said, Let's go. My Lord Duke, what about your breakfast? Is there anything worth eating in Chaos City other than Mamie's? I'll eat it when we get back to Rodu. Abraham's voice sounded from the carriage. My lord, Mamie's has suddenly announced that they will be closing for a month. Mr. Mac took Little Boss out to play and collect materials, Dykes said after he finished reporting to Michael. They're closing for a month. Michael looked up from the pile of documents he was reading, and looked at Dykes with surprise. Yes. This is the first time Mamie's has closed for such a long period of time. Dykes nodded, and said with admiration, Only a chef with superb culinary skills like Mr. Mac would dare to close a restaurant for a month when business is at its peak just to take the children out to play. Michael looked at the documents in front of him again. He was afraid that Meg didn't just take the children out to play this time. The news of the massacre of the entire family of the officials from the Ministry of War in Rodu had reached Meg yesterday, and he closed the restaurant today. There must be some connection between the two. However, Michael didn't probe further. He wasn't in a position to tell Alex and Irina what to do, let alone report to him. Oh, yes, my lord. In the morning paper sent back from the Twilight Forest today, Oster announced that the August tribe was responsible for the Rodu massacre, and gave a stern warning to the Roth Empire. If the Roth Empire dares to invade the Twilight Forest again, they will be attacked even more severely. Dykes pulled out an urgent letter from a pile of secret letters. This idiot. Michael took the letter, and read it with a frown. You don't think it was the orcs who did it? Dykes was a little surprised by Michael's reaction. The orcs should be the ones who had the most motive and power to do this, and Oster admitted it himself. Although Oster isn't very smart, he can't even take care of himself now. How would he have the ability to organize a massacre in Rodu? Michael shook his head. Then why did he admit it? This idiot most likely wants to absorb those tribes that left the war, so he forced himself to admit it. Anyway, looking at the current situation, the Roth Empire shouldn't take the risk of being attacked by all the other tribes to launch another war on the Twilight Forest, Michael said in a low voice. But if that's the case, the Roth Empire will be riled up, and Andre will have a legitimate reason to deploy his troops. It won't be difficult for him to take down the August tribe again. Dykes also frowned when he heard that. Michael put down the secret letter in his hand, and said to Dykes, Get ready. I'm going to write a letter to the Falk tribe. It's the truce period now, and all parties have to deal with things calmly. Once the situation goes out of control, the Norland continent might be dragged into a new round of racial war. By then, no one would be able to turn the tables. Vanessa, who was sitting by the window, put down the Gourmet magazine in her hand, and held the heater in her hand. She looked at the barren branches outside the courtyard wall, and worriedly said, "I heard something big happened outside. I wonder how the situation is." "It's so worrying." Laura placed a plate of snacks in front of Vanessa, and softly said, "Princess, you're not thinking of running out again, are you?" "Nonsense. Am I such an insensible person?" Vanessa widened her eyes, and pretended to be fierce. However, her widened eyes made her look even cuter. "Of course not." Laura nodded. "Laura, look at this dessert box. It's big and round. Doesn't it look like the basin of the hot pot? No pop-up window." Chapter 1995. Rodu was a majestic city. It was also the largest city on the Norland continent. After the war among species, the Roth Empire built this huge city amidst the ruins and barren land. The city was divided into dozens of markets of the same size, and the royal palace was located in the center of the city. The layout was rather similar to Chang and in the Tang dynasty. However, these markets weren't separated by walls, and their functions weren't very logical. Apart from a few areas where the rich and powerful gathered, the rest of the markets were a little chaotic. Romo Street was a not-so-famous food street near the royal palace and the offices of the various departments of the royal court. Although it was called a food street, the scattered restaurants and taverns seemed a little shabby. The adults don't seem to want to eat here recently. Business isn't good. A burly boss stood at the entrance of a restaurant, yawning as he leaned against the doorpost. "Don't mention it. I heard something big happened in the royal court recently. The adults are all in a state of panic. They don't even dare to come for a drink." The seductive female boss of the tavern next door took a deep puff from her silver pipe, and then blew out the white smoke with a dazed look. "Exactly. Business isn't good this year. The tavern next door is being sold again. This is the 5th one this year, right? It's all because a few new restaurants, taverns, and brothels have opened on Lamb Street. The adults are all gone. If this continues, our Romo Street is really going to be finished." A few more shop owners complained that business was difficult. The shop owners were all frowning, but there was nothing they could do. Not far away, two people were walking over slowly. "Mr. Hades, Lamb Street's popularity, location, and business atmosphere are all the best in this area. Especially in the past 2 years, Lamb Street has become the first choice of entertainment for all of the court officials. Are you sure you don't want to consider the shops that I showed you just then?" A middle-aged man with a full beard was standing beside Mag, who had already put on a disguise, and was trying his best to persuade him. "The location is good, but the layout and size don't meet my requirements." Meg rejected expressionlessly. After coming to Chaos City, Meg began to look for the shops that the tavern needed. He was not really here to open a shop. His main goal was to find Joshua and gather information. That was why Meg chose this area where the officials of the royal court were gathered. If Josh were to return to Rodu and his plan failed, he would definitely continue to stir up trouble. Compared to the commoners, it was easier to blow things up by attacking the officials of the imperial court. And judging from the way he controlled the Ministry of War to start the war, he might have even more tricks up his sleeve. A professional should do what a professional should do. Meg found an intermediary, and started looking for a shop right away. Lamb Street was indeed very lively, but because it was too lively, it was excluded by Meg. On the contrary, Romo Street, which was located behind Lamb Street, was much quieter, and there were more shops to choose from. This made Meg quite satisfied. Seeing that Meg wasn't interested, the agent tactfully stopped recommending shops on Lamb Street. Instead, he smiled and said, "This is Romo Street, a very famous food street nearby. There are many restaurants and pubs on this street." Meg listened to his introduction, and nodded from time to time to show that he was listening. His gaze swept across the shops on both sides of the street. He could tell that this place was indeed prosperous in the past. Yes, in the past. Now, shops that had closed down and were being sublet could be seen everywhere on both sides of the street. Furthermore, it seemed like they had closed down for a long time, and had not found anyone to take over. Meanwhile, the owners and employees of the shops that were still open were chatting while sunbathing. Judging from the employees' lackadaisical attitude and the owners' unconcealable worry, the business environment here had deteriorated to the point where it was impossible to continue operating. "Look, another fool has been brought here by Big Head to look after the shop. I wonder if he will fall for it." The tavern owner looked at Meg in a daze with a hint of mockery in her smile. "Look at how silly he looks. One look and I can tell that he is a newbie. He will definitely rush to pay up after hearing some flattery and step into the abyss. Hee, we have another fellow sufferer now." The various owners were also looking at Meg with smiles. Although they were somewhat gloating, they did not have any ill intentions. "Mr. Hades, there is a tavern up ahead that is currently being sold. You can go take a look. Whether it is the shop, decoration, or layout, they all meet your requirements." The middleman, Fitch, brought Meg to the shop that had the sign Lank's Tavern hanging on it not far away. Meg stood outside the door and looked. It was a standalone two-story building. The height was not bad, and there was some distance between it and the shops on both sides. The signboard was very ordinary. Of course, this was not important to Meg. This tavern used to be doing very well, but something happened to the owner's family, and he was unable to continue operating. Therefore, he reluctantly sold it. "If you want it, you can buy it directly. Business will definitely explode with a little renovation." Fitch took out his key and opened the door as he spoke. It had been a long time since a shop on Romo Street had been sold or sublet. Recently, more and more businesses had left the area, and it had become increasingly desolate. He was just trying his best. As long as one wasn't a complete newbie, one would normally not come to a place like this to rent or buy a shop. Of course, this Mr. Hades looked like a newbie, so he decided to give it a try and see if he could get the first order of the month. Meg allowed him to exaggerate as much as he wanted and only agreed out of politeness. He couldn't believe a single word of the real estate agent's nonsense. He pushed open the door and saw that it was an ordinary tavern. The tables and chairs were randomly placed, and there were a few empty wine bottles on the wine cabinet. There was nothing special about it, nor was there anything particularly bad about it. Of course, being ordinary was a restaurant's original sin. Meg looked around and said to Fitch, who was about to make an introduction, "Let's take this one. Call the owner over and discuss the price." Fitch was stunned, but quickly came back to his senses and said uncertainly, "Mr. Hades, are you saying that you intend to buy this shop?" "Yes, I think it's quite suitable." Meg nodded. "Oh. Okay, please wait a moment. I'll go find the owner of this shop and finalize the contract today." Fitch tried his best to control his expression and hurriedly wiped down a stool with his sleeve. He invited Meg to sit down and then quickly walked out the door. "I didn't think that I'd really run into an idiot." Fitch was wild with joy. As an intermediary trainee who had practiced for 2.5 years, he still hadn't mastered the golden art of deception in the intermediary world. He relied entirely on luck to get the order. This customer didn't seem to know much about the business, but he was also very picky and belonged to the category that was difficult to deal with. Although the price of a shop on Romo Street wasn't as high as that on Lamb Street, the price of a building like this wasn't cheap either. If he could get the deal done, the intermediary fee would be enough to feed him for half a year. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.